Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. You're not just hearing about history, you're stepping into it. That's right, Edwardian England, early 1900s, smack dab in a brutal winter. You've been dropped into a world where frost forms inside your bedroom window, coal is your best friend and worst chore, and wool is basically a second skin. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Or at least not without getting seriously uncomfortable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not trying to game the algorithm, just trying to help you nod off while learning something mildly interesting. Where are you watching from tonight, by the way? Drop your city and the time down below. I like knowing who's out there as we time travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in Edwardian England as the sun is already dipping below the horizon, casting long orange shadows across cobbled streets slick with frost. It's early December, and your breath is instantly visible, like a dragon exhaling with every panicked gasp. You're not wearing much. A thin wool overcoat someone handed you at the portal gate and boots with laughably little insulation. Your toes start complaining immediately. Everything feels older, grimier, a little more textured than you expected. The buildings lean into each other, dark brick soaked in the scent of chimney smoke. The air tastes like ash and something metallic, maybe coal dust. Horse-drawn carriages rattle over the stone, and you dodge a steaming pile of something unidentifiable just in time. The first thing you realise, you're not going to make it through this winter unless you adapt. Fast! A woman walks past you wearing what looks like 20 pounds of clothing. She's layered up in a wool dress, shawl, muff, gloves, hat, and yes, another shawl. Her cheeks are pink from the cold, but she gives you a pitying glance, like she can see your doom. She's not wrong. You try ducking into a public house, but the moment you step inside, your lungs fill with warmth and smoke. It's crowded, full of men in heavy coats and women in thick skirts, all nursing mugs of something steaming, probably beer, possibly soup. It's hard to tell here, but you don't belong and everyone knows it. Outside again, the temperature seems to have dropped another 5 degrees. You're pretty sure your nose hairs froze just now. You can't feel your hands, your boots, already damped, are leaking. Every step you take squelches slightly. The frost on the windows now looks decorative, like lace, but you know better. It's ice. Inside, people are inside those homes, probably huddled around a tiny fireplace wearing gloves and coats indoors. You hear a voice behind you, raspy and amused. "You'll want to find a coal vendor before nightfall, love." You turn to see an older man pushing a wooden cart piled high with sacks. He's got soot smeared across his face and a thick scarf wound 3 times round his neck. Unless you fancy turning into a block of ice. He's not joking. In this era, people really did freeze to death in their homes. The winter of 1907 alone claimed dozens in London. Many of them elderly or living in tenements without proper coal rations, and while the middle and upper classes grumbled about their chilly parlours, the poor faced nights of brutal cold with nothing but newspaper stuffed in their boots. Fun fact, newspaper wasn't just for news, it was insulation. People would line their clothes with it, wrap their legs, even use it as bedding. Not particularly comfortable, but when your choices are crinkle with every step or die of exposure, you learn to live with a little noise. As the light fades, you find shelter in a boarding house, a creaky place run by a stern widow who eyes you suspiciously before letting you in. "One night," she says, "and don't bring lice." The room is small, the bed hard, and the window doesn't shut all the way. You swear there's ice forming on the inside of the glass. The mattress smells faintly of mildew and pipe smoke, and when you sit down, a cloud of dust puffs up like it's greeting you. The one blessing? A small coal stove in the corner. It's not lit yet, and the coal bin is nearly empty, but you scrape together just enough to get it going. The fire crackles softly, filling the room with a weak orange glow. You huddle near it, hugging your knees, trying not to think about how much colder it'll get by midnight. And here's the kicker. This isn't even a particularly bad winter by Edwardian standards. The winters of 1903 and 11 were far worse, with sub-zero temperatures stretching for weeks, the Thames icing over, and snow blanketing cities in silence and inconvenience. But even in this mild cold, you're learning how survival wasn't just about strength or money. It was about ritual, routine. People had systems. Light the stove before dawn, keep the kettle on at all times, never let the fire die completely. That meant waking up at 3 a.m. to throw more coal on. Miss that, and you'd wake up to a frozen basin, icy floors and stiff limbs. There were no thermostats here, just strategy and suffering. What's funny is, some historians still argue about whether the Edwardians were tougher, or just more resigned. Some believe the cold acted as a sort of social glue, people gathering in parlours to share warmth, tea and gossip. Others argue it deepened divisions, those with warmth keeping it, those without scraping by in shadows. The truth, as usual, probably sits somewhere in between. You lie back on the thin mattress, wrapped in every piece of cloth you could find in the room. The fire's dim now, but the coals still glow red. Somewhere in the distance a carriage wheel clatters over ice, and a dog barks once, then goes silent. Everything is still. Cold has a way of making even time feel slower, like the world's waiting for a thaw that won't come. You close your eyes and exhale slowly, watching your breath drift upward like a ghost. Tomorrow, you'll need more coal, maybe a proper coat, and gloves. So many gloves. But for now, you've survived one night. That's something. Morning in Edwardian England doesn't so much arrive as it creeps in like a guilty guest. There's no glorious sunrise, just a dim, sullen grey that seeps through the frosted window like it regrets showing up. You wake up in the same boarding house room, your breath puffing out in little clouds and your toes, well, you're not entirely convinced they're still attached. It's that special brand of cold where you can't tell if you're shivering or vibrating with existential dread. The fire, unsurprisingly, died during the night. You must have fallen asleep too hard to remember the 3 a.m. coal offering. That's a rookie mistake. Your punishment? The bed linens are cold and slightly damp from condensation. The window now has proper ice feathers growing across it. Gorgeous. Completely useless. You sit up and immediately regret it as your muscles protest like they've aged 40 years overnight. The only thing colder than the air is the floor, which is made of wood and pure spite. Now begins the process of dressing for the day. And by dressing, what we really mean is creating a wearable fortress. The Edwardians didn't just put on clothes, they layered like their lives depended on it. Because they did. You start with your combinations, which is a fun little euphemism for full-body woolen underwear. Not sexy, very itchy. It's got buttons in too many places and smells vaguely of dust and last winter. You wiggle into it while trying not to scream. Hugs everywhere. Over that goes a flannel shirt, thick stockings, a woolen vest. Maybe another shirt if you're lucky. Then the trousers, heavy and lined, and thick socks. If you're female presenting today, your situation is even more dire. Corset, petticoats, chemise, stockings, possibly bloomers, and then the gown or skirt ensemble. Walking in this many layers feels like suiting up in medieval armour, but it's the only thing between you and hypothermia. Outerwear is its own production. Overcoats are not optional, they are giant, wool-laden monsters with high collars, oversized buttons and exactly no flexibility. Add a scarf which you wrap around your neck and lower face, a hat pulled low, gloves, fingerless if you're working class, lined with rabbit fur if you're posh, and finally, boots. The boots are heavy, stiff and not waterproof. They're made for suffering. That's their whole vibe. You're now functionally insulated, but barely mobile. Try bending over. That's hilarious. Try climbing stairs. An event. But for once, you're not actively freezing, just simmering in discomfort. Every movement creates friction between fabrics. Static is a daily hazard. Edwardians had a complicated relationship with layering. For them, warmth wasn't just a matter of health, it was status. The more layers you wore, the more it said about your ability to afford good tailoring and indoor fires. For the upper classes, layering was elegance. For the poor, it was survival. And while thick wool helped, it also trapped sweat. You were either freezing or sticky. No middle ground. You step outside and are immediately hit with a gust of wind that slices through your scarf like it's made of paper. Welcome to Wind Chill, 1905 style. You trudge down the street, joining a procession of similarly bundled up human burritos, all breathing fog and staring grimly into the middle distance. This isn't a city. It's a communal frostbite experiment. A coal vendor passes with his cart again, now ringing a bell. You recognise him from last night. He gives you a once-over, then grunts approvingly. Dressed for the part now, eh? Yeah. You nod, too winded to reply from the effort of walking in 40 pounds of wool. There's a woman sweeping snow off her steps with a broom that looks like it's from a medieval painting. She's got a kerchief on her head and actual frost in her eyebrows. Children run past, already late for school, and you wonder how they move so fast in boots the size of flower pots. One girl has a knitted cape, and it flaps behind her like she's a very cold superhero. And here's something odd. Despite all this, no one looks surprised by the cold. It's just life, routine. The Edwardians weren't sitting around discussing climate change or long-term forecasts. They expected winter to be a multi-month ordeal, and they adapted accordingly. You did what you had to, and what you had to do involved a lot of wool. Here's a quirky little fact. Some Edwardians believe that wearing red flannel against the skin helped ward off colds and other illnesses. Not sure why red was the magic colour. Maybe it gave them the illusion of warmth. Either way, red underthings were a thing. You're half tempted to find some. Some scholars still debate whether Edwardian winter gear was as effective as we think. Sure, they had multiple layers, but without waterproofing or proper insulation, all that wool turned into cold, damp misery when wet. Others argue the layering was effective, especially for those who knew how to trap body heat properly, like chimney sweeps and coal porters, who practically invented the grit-your-teeth-and-suffer method of staying warm. By the time you reach the next lodging, a slightly fancier boarding house with fewer draft holes, you're sweating under your layers but grateful for every stitch. You sit near the fire, boots steaming, gloves off, fingers twitching back to life. The matron brings you a cup of something hot. It's vaguely tea-flavoured and very sweet, probably boiled 3 times. You don't care. You sip it like it's the elixir of life. Your layers start to relax around you, wool easing up just a bit as the warmth of the room finally seeps in. You're no longer just surviving, you're adapting. Every scarf, every sock, every stiff collar is a tiny rebellion against the chill. And yet, there's something quietly noble about it all. The routine of layering, the stoic way people greeted frost, the cultural patience it took to build your daily cocoon. These weren't people who cried over a broken thermostat. They didn't have thermostats. They had frostbitten ears, blistered feet, and a strange obsession with flannel. You watch a boy pass by outside the window. He's got 2 scarves wrapped around his head like a mummy. Only his eyes are visible, blinking out from the wool. He sees you, nods solemnly, then disappears into the snowy haze, and you realise the only way to survive this is to become one of them. The problem with relying on coal for warmth is that coal doesn't care about your schedule. It doesn't arrive magically, it doesn't burn itself, and it absolutely refuses to clean up after its own mess. That's your job now. You wake early, again, and trudge downstairs to find the fire has dwindled to nothing but pale grey ash. The room smells like last night's smoke and damp socks. Your fingers are numb before you even reach the scuttle. Coal in Edwardian England is both lifeline and burden. You retrieve the metal bucket from beside the hearth. It's heavier than it looks, filled halfway with clinker and last night's regret. Outside, in the rear courtyard, there's a small coal shed. You have to break a thin crust of frost off the door just to get it open. Inside, the coal pile is low, mostly chunks the size of fists, black and glinting with flecks that catch the weak morning light. It looks like it should be valuable, maybe cursed, definitely messy. By the time you load up the bucket and haul it back inside, your arms ache, and your gloves are stained with soot. You spill a little as you refill the grate. That's okay. Coal dust gets everywhere, between the cracks in the floorboards, in your nose, in your teeth. By the end of the week, you'll be coughing like a Dickensian side character and wondering if it's just a cold or something more poetic. Lighting the fire is its own ordeal. You lay a paper, probably old news about a royal garden party or a scandal involving someone named Reginald. Then sticks, then the smallest coal bits. You strike a match, hold your breath, and hope. When it catches, it smoulders stubbornly, coughing like a cranky dog before flaring into life. The warmth comes slow. Everything in Edwardian winter comes slow. The fire begins its patient climb toward actual heat. You sit beside it, hunched like a vulture, hands out, waiting for the air to shift. The warmth only stretches so far, maybe a 5-foot radius. After that, the room returns to its natural state. Icebox. You glance at the ceiling. It's already collecting condensation. Eventually, that will turn into droplets that fall periodically onto the floor, or your face. This is your main chore now. Tend the fire. Don't let it die. Feed it like a living thing. Stoke it, clean it, empty the ash. Ah, the ash. That's where things get real. Ash isn't just an annoying byproduct, it's voluminous. Every few hours you have to shovel it out, let it cool, and then find somewhere to put it. There's usually a metal ash can behind the house, but if it's already full, you get creative. Some people used ash for cleaning, sprinkling it on icy steps for traction. Others used it as makeshift filler in the garden, or, get this, brushed it through their hair to absorb grease. That's not a joke. Dry shampoo circa 1902. You wipe your hands on your trousers and stare at the hearth, now glowing with a little pride and a lot of soot. It's amazing how much of your day revolves around this small stubborn flame. And yet this was the norm. In upper-class houses, there'd be multiple fireplaces, one in nearly every room, and servants running from one to the next, keeping them alive like spinning plates. In working-class homes, the fire might be the only source of heat in the entire building. That meant sharing a single room for warmth. Privacy was a luxury. Comfort was a fire hazard. You're not alone in this struggle. Through the window you see other tenants hauling coal, shaking out rugs, brushing soot off sills. The air is thick with chimney smoke. From a distance the neighbourhood looks picturesque. Curled smoke rising against a pale sky, little cottages with frosty roofs, but up close it's hard labour and black fingernails. Now here's the fun twist. Not all coal is created equal. In Edwardian England, households dealt with different grades, house coal being one of the more common ones. But it still had problems. It was smoky, smelly, and left oily residue on everything. Poorer households often had to rely on slack, basically coal dust mixed with tiny fragments. It burned dirtier and faster, which meant more smoke and less heat. This led to a fair bit of controversy in its day. Scholars and environmentalists, yes, they existed even then, debated the effects of coal smoke on public health. Cities like London were often blanketed in thick yellow-grey smog, especially during long, still winters. People called it pea soup fog, and if you were outside during one of those days, you could literally lose sight of your own feet. The coal haze was so thick it could seep through closed windows. Breathing was like drinking a warm cup of exhaust fumes. But at the time, there wasn't much choice. Coal was king, even as it choked the streets. Some historians still argue whether this dependence was truly inevitable, or if alternative heating, like early gas systems, could have caught on faster. Gas was cleaner, but far more expensive. Plus, it wasn't cosy. And if the Edwardians valued anything besides formality and constipation, it was a cosy fire. As the fire crackles and your legs start to feel something approaching sensation again, you settle into a worn chair and stare at the flames. The room is dim, amber glowed, slightly smoky. You've still got flecks of soot on your cheek. The smell clings to your clothes, your hair, your soul. You think of how many thousands of hands have done this before you. Shoveled coal, cursed at wet kindling, nursed a spark into life with the desperation of a caveman and the dignity of a Downton Abbey extra. This was the heartbeat of the home. Not the kitchen, not the drawing room, the hearth. There's a certain rhythm to it. Check the grate, feed the phlegm, empty the ash, repeat. It's not just a chore, it's your schedule. The Edwardians might not have had Google calendars, but their days were blocked out in coal hours. As the fire finally roars and you feel a rare moment of full-body warmth, a sense of victory washes over you. Briefly, because you remember you'll have to do this all over again in a few hours, and you still haven't figured out where to dump the ash. You're not sure what wakes you up this time. Could be the way your nose has gone numb in the early morning air. Could be the fact that your blanket has slithered off sometime during the night and now rests crumpled on the icy floor like a useless wool corpse. Or maybe it's just your bladder, which doesn't care how cold it is outside the warmest 5 square inches of mattress. Either way, it's dark, it's miserable, and it's time for one of the Edwardian winter's strangest inventions, the ritual of bed warmth. Getting into bed during an Edwardian winter isn't like curling up in modern flannel sheets and scrolling on your phone until you drift off. First of all, no phone. Second of all, no flannel. And third, if you just climb in cold, you're effectively lying down in a refrigerated crypt. Edwardians knew this. They had methods. You crawl stiffly from bed, wrap your blanket around your shoulders like a reluctant monk and fumble for the fire. The embers are stubborn this morning, grey and lazy, like they know you need them. You throw on some coal and hope for the best. Then you shuffle to the corner, where tonight's sacred item waits in its brass glory, the bed warmer. It's exactly what it sounds like. A flat round pan with a long wooden handle filled with glowing coals. You're supposed to slide it between the sheets and wave it back and forth to warm the bed before climbing in. It sounds charming in theory. In practice, it's a mix of fire hazard and desperate prayer. The coals are temperamental, the pan is hot enough to brand a cow, and the sheets? They smell faintly of soot and something else you can't quite place, possibly history itself. You shuffle back to the bed and begin the process. Slow strokes under the covers, back and forth like you're ironing the ghosts out of them. You can feel the heat begin to radiate, not evenly, but enough. Enough that the sheets go from death shroud to mildly unpleasant towel. You remove the pan, set it carefully aside and climb in. Some people used other methods. Baked bricks wrapped in flannel, ceramic foot warmers filled with hot water, even bottles of hot gin, not recommended, unless you like waking up soaked and confused. One of the more bizarre trends? People using actual small animals, like dogs or even rabbits, as living bed heaters, which works, but imagine trying to explain that to your landlord. You nestle into the semi-warm bed and sigh. Sleep comes slower in this kind of cold, but you've learned to layer your blankets like a military operation. There's the sheet, then the woolen blanket, then the second woolen blanket, then the scratchy army-style one you found in the closet. You're basically a human lasagna at this point, held in place by the weight of 20 pounds of fabric. In richer households, people had feather mattresses and down-filled eiderdowns, luxurious, fluffy and warm. But you've got a lumpy bed, a slight draft, and the memory of last night's hot coals. Still, you make it work, because everyone did. They had to. Complaining about the cold didn't change it. You adjusted. You got clever. In the dark, you hear the creak of floorboards as someone else down the hall heads to the chamber pot. Ah yes, that Edwardian joy. Bathrooms, if they existed at all, were often across the house or even in a chilly outhouse. Most people kept a ceramic pot under the bed for emergencies. You didn't get up and wander around barefoot at 3 a.m. unless you wanted frostbite and judgment. Let's pause here and address something modern historians love to squabble over. Just how much did Edwardians suffer from the cold at night? Some say they were just used to it, that their bodies adapted, and they actually preferred a chilly room with fresh air. Others argue that was a myth pushed by upper-class lifestyle manuals trying to sound virtuous. Open the window an inch at night for good health, they'd say, while sleeping under 3 duvets next to a roaring fire. It's one of those lovely historical debates that probably hinges on class. Again. By morning, the bed has lost all its warmth. You've sweated through at least one layer of flannel, but your face feels like you've been sleeping outdoors. That's common. Many Edwardians woke up with chapped lips, dry nostrils, and hair that crackled from static. You sit up slowly, feeling the cold hit your back like a slap from an angry ghost. But tonight will be different. You've got a plan. After breakfast, which, spoiler, will be some kind of porridge again, you head out in search of an upgrade. Not for your wardrobe, not for your fire, for your sleep. There's a stall at the market selling ceramic foot warmers, chunky jugs made of clay, designed to be filled with hot water and tucked at the foot of the bed. You haggle a bit. The vendor's missing 3 teeth and has a cough that sounds like it's trying to escape his lungs. You buy it anyway. Back at the boarding house, you boil water over the fire and fill the jug carefully. It radiates heat like a little sun. You test it in bed, slide it down between your feet, and instantly feel the difference. It's clunky. It'll probably leave a bruise if you roll over onto it, but it's warm. That night, you're almost excited for bed. You line up your layers, pre-warm the sheets with the brass pan, tuck the foot warmer in place, and slide into your wool cocoon. The fire is crackling, your breath still visible in the air, but the cold doesn't feel quite so cruel. You're learning the tricks, adapting, becoming one of them. As you drift off, the sounds of the city fade, hooves clattering on the stone, the muffled laughter of people braving the pub, the distant rattle of someone shaking out a rug even though it's pitch black outside. You're part of it now. Just don't kick over the jug. The thing they never tell you about surviving a winter like this, an Edwardian winter where the cold isn't just a temperature but a full-time mood, is that even when you're inside, wrapped in 17 layers sitting practically on top of a fire, you're still cold. Maybe not frozen toes, icicle hair cold, but deep in your bones, no escape cold. It's the kind that hums quietly under your skin, like your body knows it's only pretending to be warm, and it changes everything, including how you behave, how you speak, even how you sit in a chair. You're in the front parlour this morning and there's a group of people gathered around the fireplace like it's a sacred shrine. No one's really talking, they're just sitting. Perfect posture, gloved hands folded in laps, eyes focused on the flames. They're doing that Edwardian thing where suffering is fine as long as it's dignified. You want to slouch, maybe stretch your legs out, groan a little, but one glance around the room and you quickly understand, nope, that's not how it's done here. You sit stiffly, trying not to let your knees knock together. The chair is wooden and under-upholstered, the seat cold enough that you can feel it through your trousers. You shift, trying to find a position that doesn't freeze one part of your anatomy or another. It doesn't work. Politeness in this era is a complex ballet of facial restraint, temperature denial, and quiet shared misery. Everyone's freezing, but no one says they're freezing. That would be vulgar. Instead, they comment on the weather in veiled terms. A bit brisk this morning. The frost is rather persistent, or, for the truly stoic, just a serene nod and a deeper wrap of the shawl. Even the fire isn't friendly. It crackles just enough to mock you. If you move an inch too far from it, your extremities begin shutting down. Too close and your shins roast while your back freezes. There's a small brass fender surrounding the hearth to keep people from sticking their boots directly in, but you can tell someone's done just that. There's a faint scorched mark on the edge of the rug and a smell like singed wool. Now and then, someone adds coal to the grate with long-handled tongs. It's a ritual, almost religious. No one rushes it. The coal is laid gently, like a gift. A whisper of blackness rises into the air with each addition, and everyone instinctively leans back just a little. You do too. This isn't your house after all, door. And manners are currency here. And while we're on the subject of manners, let's talk about parlour etiquette in winter. You don't complain, you don't huddle, you don't rock back and forth like a popsicle trying to stay conscious. You sit like a portrait, spine long, ankles together. If your nose is running, you dab it with a handkerchief discreetly. Blowing your nose loudly is the equivalent of setting off a firecracker in church. You also don't shiver visibly. Shivering is a bit common, a bit lower class. If you absolutely must tremble, you do it through subtle vibrations, like an anxious teacup on a saucer. Of course, the upper classes had a very different experience of cold than, say, the coal porter who dragged your fuel in this morning. In well-to-do homes, parlours had plush rugs, thick velvet curtains to keep drafts out, and layers upon layers of upholstery. The whole room was designed to retain heat. Even the heavy furniture played a role. And in those homes, if you got cold, you didn't stoke the fire yourself. You rang a bell and had someone do it for you. Downstairs, it was another story. The servants' quarters were notoriously frigid. Kitchens had warmth, yes, but only while something was cooking. Bedrooms? Not so much. Many servants slept in attic rooms with thin walls and wind that sliced through the rafters like a blade. Still, they were expected to show up to work freshly scrubbed, presentable, and not visibly dying of frostbite, because nothing says professionalism like hiding hypothermia behind a polite smile. There's an open debate among historians about whether Edwardian domestic life was truly as polished and pristine as diaries and etiquette manuals suggest, or if it was simply well-disguised discomfort. Some argue that the illusion of grace under pressure was a necessary psychological coping mechanism. Others think it was more performative, a kind of cold-weather theatre everyone agreed to participate in. A woman across the parlour reaches for the tea tray. Her fingers are gloved, her movement careful. The teapot is silver and steaming, and as she pours, you realise that warm drinks weren't just a treat, they were a survival tactic. Tea was practically medicinal. You're handed a cup, no milk, just strong, bitter liquid and a sugar cube bobbing like a sad boat. It warms your hands, barely. You hold it anyway, letting the heat soak in like sunlight through glass. Above the mantel is a clock, delicate hands ticking forward, each second louder than the last. You find yourself watching it, counting minutes. It's not just a way to pass the time. It's a countdown to when the fire might need more coal, or when someone will excuse themselves to avoid catching a chill from sitting too long. Even warmth here is scheduled. And let's not forget the ever-present drafts. No matter how nicely furnished a room is, it's always under siege from the outside. Wind whistles through floorboards, past windows, around door frames. Some families shoved rags or rolled up towels along the base of the door to keep it out. Others had decorative solutions, ornamental draft excluders shaped like little fabric animals. You spot one now, a long velvet sausage dog slumped nobly at the foot of the door. Even the stuffed animals are doing their part to survive. By midday, the sun struggles out from behind a cloud and light filters through the frosted panes. It doesn't warm the room, but it tricks your brain into thinking it might be warmer. The fire still burns, the clock still ticks, and no one has moved more than a few inches in an hour. You're starting to get it. The secret to Edwardian winter survival wasn't just about coal or blankets, it was about composure. You endure with grace. You freeze, but you don't flinch. You sip your tea, nod politely, and pretend that your nose isn't about to fall off. Now excuse yourself gently, retreat to the kitchen, shake out your arms, shiver freely where no one can see. You've earned it. School in Edwardian winter is less about learning and more about surviving long enough to mislearn something. You're standing outside a squat brick building that somehow manages to look both sturdy and deeply offended by your presence. Frost clings to every surface. The air bites at your cheeks like it's bad you got out of bed. And inside you're told is an education. Technically. You shuffle through the gate, boots stiff from yesterday's puddles now frozen solid into strange new shapes. The school bell rings, a dull, tinny clang that doesn't so much summon children as warn them. A handful of boys and girls, all similarly mummified in woolen scarves, trudge in behind you, red-nosed and silent. No one's chatting, no one's laughing, because they all know what's waiting inside. The schoolroom smells like ink and mildew. You walk in and immediately lose a few degrees of body heat. The windows are tall but crusted with condensation and ice, letting in grey light and absolutely no warmth. Desks are arranged in tight, miserable rows. Each one has an inkwell sunk into its top, and many of them are crusted over because yes, the ink has frozen. Again, there's a faint blue sheen over the surface of each one, like a sad little skating rink for your writing implement. You take your seat and immediately regret it. The bench is so cold it draws the warmth out of your spine. You sit rigidly, trying to create the least surface area contact possible. Like you're hovering over a toilet seat in a dodgy pub. You pull your gloves off with visible reluctance. Writing with them on is impossible, but taking them off, that's just an open invitation to frostbite. The teacher enters. She's wrapped in a shawl so thick she looks like a sentient pile of curtains. Her nose is pink. Her hands are red. Her expression is the same as yours. Why are we all pretending this is normal? And yet, lessons begin. Geography, arithmetic, Latin if you're unlucky. You dip your pen into the frozen ink, which doesn't stick to the nib. You shake it. Nothing. You press harder. Still nothing. Eventually, someone's brave enough to raise their hand and ask if they can warm their ink bottle by the fire. The teacher gives a weary nod. You all watch enviously as that lucky soul sprints across the room to the fireplace, currently hosting a fire that can be described as decorative at best. The rest of the morning unfolds in a haze of frozen toes and mangled cursive. Every breath you take clouds the air in front of you. You can see other students' breath too, little puffs rising with every sigh of boredom. The cold creeps up your legs, settles in your shoulders, numbs your fingertips, but no one stops. Because stopping isn't part of the day. You continue. That's just what you do. Some kids cheat the system by wrapping their feet in newspaper inside their boots. Others have brought hot potatoes in their coat pockets, not for lunch but for hand warmers. They'll eat them later, probably cold and gritty, but right now those potatoes are tiny golden miracles. You stare at one potato boy with deep respect. And the clothes. You think you've seen winter layering before? Think again. These kids are dressed like they're planning to hike the Alps after lunch. Sweaters under shirts, scarves tied twice around the neck, gloves with the fingertips cut off, caps pulled low over ears, and still it isn't enough. You glance around and see pink skin, trembling lips, occasional shivers. One boy in the corner is holding his hands under his armpits. He's probably been doing that all week. Here's your fringe fact for the day. In especially cold schools, some teachers reportedly let students run in place for a minute or two mid-lesson to keep circulation going. Not officially, of course. That would look undignified. But informally, a little foot stomping here, a little arm flapping there. One school in Yorkshire even tried lighting tiny spirit burners under each desk, basically little flames in a tin can to warm hands. It worked right up until someone's desk caught fire. There's ongoing debate among historians about whether Edwardian school children were truly hardened by this kind of cold or simply traumatized. One camp argues it built resilience, that learning through discomfort taught discipline and character. Another group says that's nonsense, and all it built was chilblains, a lifelong hatred of long division, and an uncanny ability to write legibly with numb fingers. You can probably guess where you'd fall in that debate. By noon your stomach is growling and you're dreaming of lunch. Not because it's a feast, Edwardian school lunches are bleak, but because it's your only shot at warming up. You're dismissed into a muddy yard where students unwrap thick grease-proof paper parcels. Bread with lard, maybe cheese if they're lucky, a cold boiled egg that smells suspicious. You've brought something called dripping on toast. It's beef fat smeared on bread. It tastes acceptable, but it's got calories, and calories are fuel. That's all that matters now. After lunch you file back in. The fire hasn't improved. The room is now slightly wetter from all the stomping boots. A girl sneezes, a boy coughs. The teacher applies a dab of smelling salts to herself when she thinks no one's looking. You try to focus on the blackboard, which is blurry, probably from the fog in your brain or the fog on your eyelashes. But here's the thing. You start to see it, the weird communal endurance of it all. No one is comfortable, but you're all equally uncomfortable. There's a rhythm to it. Kids pass notes using the steam from their breath to fog up windows first. Someone draws a cartoon of the teacher as a yeti on a scrap of board. Someone else starts humming a tune about frozen ink. And through it all, the teacher soldiers on, chalk squeaking, voice steady. As the day ends and you're released back into the brittle grey afternoon, you notice something strange. The cold feels less shocking now, not because it's gone, it's definitely still awful, but because you've adjusted. Slightly. Enough to walk home with your chin up and your ears buzzing and the sense that you've earned whatever fire is waiting for you. Or at the very least, another potato in your coat pocket. You think you're starting to get the hang of it. The layers, the fire rituals, the tea that's mostly boiled wool with sugar, the noble art of pretending you're not cold while actively freezing. But then, just when you dare to feel a smidge of comfort, it happens. A morning so cold, so unforgiving, that you can't ignore it anymore. The pipes have frozen, you discover it when you go to splash your face with the usual lukewarm trickle from the basin and are met with nothing. Not even a drip. You tilt the pitcher. Ice. Solid. You knock on it like it owes you rent, but it's a useless block of regret. Welcome to one of the true horrors of Edwardian winter living, when indoor plumbing, already a fragile miracle, simply gives up and dies. There's a knock at your door. It's the boarding house matron, wrapped in a shawl, face as frosted as the windows. "Water pump's frozen," she says, as if it's the weather's fault, which technically it is. If you need to go, best use the chamber pot and toss it out the window like the rest. You blink. You thought she was joking the first few times you heard the phrase, "toss it out the window." But no, today you understand. The pipes aren't just frozen. The entire bathroom situation has collapsed. Toilets? Don't even think about it. If your boarding house has an indoor lavatory, and that's a big if, it's nothing more than an icy porcelain throne with a frozen water tank and a very bad attitude. The chain doesn't pull, the flush doesn't flush. And the cell? It's somewhere between old soup and dead raccoon in a church bell tower. You resort, as all Edwardians did at some point, to the chamber pot. It's ceramic, floral patterned, and deeply humiliating. The handle's colder, the seat doesn't exist, it's just you, your knees, and the abyss. You do what must be done, then carry it, arms extended like a cursed relic, through the hall, down the stairs, out the door, and into the alley. And yes, you toss it, because everyone is tossing it. Windows open across the lane. A child shouts, "Gardyloo!" the traditional warning cry of Edinburgh's medieval streets, now repurposed by Edwardians with a twisted sense of humour. You hear splashes, splatters. Somewhere nearby a cat yowls in offence. Sanitation, you realise, is more philosophy than practice. The smell of frozen sewage drifts in on the breeze. It's faint, but there. Bouquet of human misery, horse manure and coal smoke. You breathe through your mouth, which is somehow worse. And then there's the real disaster. No water to make tea. The boarding house kitchen is filled with quiet, shuffling despair. Teapots sit dry, cups remain cold. Someone has tried melting snow in a saucepan over the stove, but it's slow going and results in water that tastes like laundry. You help chip a chunk of ice from the cistern in the yard and watch it hiss as it hits the kettle. You never thought you'd miss lukewarm tea. Now you'd sell your soul for it. Let's talk about Edwardian plumbing, shall we? It was a patchy regional mess. Some homes had cast iron pipes running indoors, technically a marvel of the era, but they were often poorly insulated, prone to bursting, and absolutely no match for a serious cold snap. Wealthier households might have had servants to pour hot water over the exposed sections every morning, like plumbers with aprons. For everyone else, once the pipes froze, you were at the mercy of the thaw. In poorer tenements, people hauled water from public pumps or wells, which could also freeze. This led to long lines in the early mornings, buckets in hand, breath clouding the air, all for the chance at a few pints of not completely frozen liquid. And when that failed, you got creative. Melt snow, collect icicles, hope. And what about bathing? That's adorable. Winter was the season of strategic hygiene. Full baths became a luxury, if not a legend. You settled for a flannel wipe down near the fire. Face, underarms, hands, and maybe feet if you were feeling ambitious. Hair washing, once a week max. Some used dry shampoo in the form of starch or even crushed violet petals, depending on how fancy you wanted to smell under the grease. There's a scholarly debate about just how often Edwardians bathed in winter. Some sources suggest weekly bath nights were common, with heated tubs brought into kitchens and filled manually. Others argue that in harsh winters, even that was skipped in favour of heavy perfumes, pomades, and the good old lie that fresh air is cleaner than soap. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between bravado and BO. Later that day, you venture out into the street in search of an unblocked pump. The sun hasn't done much to melt the ice, but the city is alive anyway. Horses plod along, hooves sparking on the cobbles, vendors shout through scarves, chimneys belch smoke into the air like angry gods. You see a sign posted near the square, "Frozen mains, water cart will attend." It's not just your house, it's half the city. And the city's solution? A man in a cart with a barrel ladling water into household buckets like it's the Middle Ages. You get your ration and trudge back, proud and frozen. You've got water now, barely enough to drink, none to waste, but it's something. You heat a little on the stove, mix it with leaves that once resembled tea, and sit near the fire sipping what might be the worst beverage you've ever had. But it's hot, and you earned it. That night the plumbing still hasn't thawed. The matron mutters something about the frost gods, which might be a joke or a desperate superstition. Someone lights a candle in the hallway as a ward. Another lodger says he poured gin down the drain to bribe the pipes. You don't ask questions, you just add another blanket, brace yourself for another freezing chamber pot encounter, and wonder if you'll ever stop smelling like coal dust and boiled despair. But you've survived another day, one icy flush at a time. You wake up to the soft clink of cutlery and the low groan of the kettle beginning its morning protest on the iron stove downstairs. It's still dark out, one of those endless Edwardian winter mornings where the sky stays the colour of damp parchment well past breakfast. Your breath fogs in the air. Again. You've long since stopped being surprised by this. It's practically a roommate now. Today, though, there's a particular urgency in the house. People are moving faster. Not because they're energised, but because they want to reach the kitchen before the warmth runs out. You join the stampede, shuffling down in your layers, collar pulled up high, eyes half shut. And there it is, the boarding house's narrow kitchen alive with the smell of something boiling, something deeply beige. Welcome to the Edwardian winter breakfast table. You're handed a bowl. No one asks, no one offers, you just receive. It's soup for breakfast. Technically, it's porridge. But let's not pretend we're dealing with oatmeal in a nice modern sense. This is more like hot wallpaper paste with chunks. The consistency is somewhere between gruel and mudslide. It's made from barley or oats, or something root-based you don't want to know about. Someone's added a pinch of salt. Another has stirred in a splash of milk so thin it might be water wearing a hat. You eat it because it's hot, because it sticks to your ribs, because in Edwardian England, soup is not just food, it's central heating in a bowl. You look around and notice something strange. Everyone's eating soup. Not just here. All over town, people are sipping broth from mugs and nursing thick stews for the breakfast, lunch and dinner. It's a theme, it's a lifestyle, it's an edible radiator. The logic makes sense. In cold weather, your body burns more calories trying to stay warm. Heavy, hot, soupy meals are efficient. They're filling, they're cheap. They're also, frankly, kind of bland. But in this era, you weren't chasing flavour. You were chasing survival. You scrape your spoon along the bottom of the bowl and hit something that might have been a potato. Possibly a turnip. Hard to tell in this light. But it's edible, and it's yours. You chew. It fights back slightly. You swallow anyway. There's toast too, just the one slice hard and dark, like it's been punished. Butter is scarce, but if you're lucky, there's a little beef dripping spread on mop. Rich folk call it poor man's pâté. Everyone else just calls it breakfast. You don't ask questions, you eat the toast. Sometimes there's tea, sometimes there's boiled chicory pretending to be coffee. Occasionally there's a watery jam, or if someone splurged, a bit of a cold meat from the night before, but most days, you're starting your morning with soup, and you're grateful for it. Fun fact, some Edwardian cookbooks even had entire sections devoted to breakfast soups. Broths, bone stews, mashed pea and ham mixtures, all recommended for their warming qualities. One pamphlet even suggested beginning the day with onion soup for strength and cheer, which feels like a stretch, but after 2 weeks of frozen plumbing you'll try anything once. There's debate among historians about whether Edwardians actually enjoyed these meals or simply endured them. Some records describe breakfast as a grand, varied affair. Eggs, meats, kidneys, toast, fruit, tea, but those were the upper classes, Paul. In houses with butlers and sideboards and enough coal to heat an entire menu. For the working and middle classes, soup. Again. And don't forget, food preservation was an issue in winter. Fresh produce was limited. Most fruits were long gone, vegetables were root-based and barely hanging on, and milk had a suspicious tendency to freeze in the bottle or go off by noon. People used what they had, which meant boil it, mash it, or forget it. You finish your bowl and feel something miraculous. Warmth. Not just in your stomach, but spreading outward like a hug from the inside. The sensation is fleeting, but it buys you time. Enough time to wrap your scarf around your face and head out into the street. Outside there, air hits your cheeks like a slap with a frozen trout. You clutch your belly, trying to retain that internal fire as long as possible. Around you, others are doing the same. Factory workers shovel hot bread into their mouths while walking. Street sweepers sip mystery liquid from dented flasks. School children pass around a single meat pie like it's the Ark of the Covenant. You pass a soup kitchen on your way. It's not just for the poor, though that's who lines up, shivering, hands clasped around tin cups. Soup kitchens were common in Edwardian cities, especially in the colder months. Charities, churches, and even businesses set them up to keep the worst off from freezing. The soup was thin, sometimes little more than salted water with a whisper of cabbage, but it was hot, and hot mattered more than flavour. A bowl of soup could mean the difference between shivering through the night or not waking up at all. You stop into a corner shop that smells like dust and old licorice, mostly to get out of the wind. The shopkeeper is wearing fingerless gloves and a heavy vest. He offers you a hot meat pasty which you accept like it's a rare jewel. It's wrapped in wax paper that's already translucent with grease. You take a bite. It's hot. That's all that counts. And this brings you to one of the quieter truths of the Edwardian winter experience. Comfort was a fleeting, borrowed thing. It wasn't about luxury. It was about scraping together enough warmth and calories to push through the day. A bowl of soup, a bit of fat on toast, a hand warmer in the shape of yesterday's potato. These were the victories. Back at the boarding house, you catch the matron stirring something in a big pot. She looks up, shrugs. "Mutton soup again?" You nod, drop your pasty wrapper in the bin, and slide onto the bench beside the hearth. The fire crackles, the soup bubbles, and for a few brief steamy moments the room feels almost safe, almost cosy. Just don't ask what part of the mutton she used. By now your skin has become a battleground. You've got bruises from sitting on hard benches, a burn mark on your wrist from a rogue coal spark, and something deeply questionable happening behind your left ear, where your scarf's been rubbing for days. But the worst part, hands down, no condust, is the itch. It starts small, just a tickle behind the knee, or a subtle scratch on your chest. Then suddenly you're squirming like a flea-ridden cat in church. Your skin rebels, it's red, raw, and crying out for mercy. The culprit? Your full-body suit of woolen armour, or, as the Edwardians like to call it, health wear. You sit in front of the fire, shirt half unbuttoned, scratching at your side with the urgency of a man who's just discovered what sandpaper feels like. Your undergarments, made of coarse, unbleached wool, are doing an excellent job of trapping heat and moisture and any dreams you had of comfort. You're itchy in places you didn't know could itch. Under your arms, behind your knees, in that tender no-man's land between sock and trouser hem. It's a full-body rebellion. In Edwardian England, woolen underwear was not optional in winter. It was survival. Long johns, combinations, thermal drawers, whatever you called them, they were designed to hold heat in and ideally keep death out. But they were never soft. Oh no. These were not modern merino, ethically sourced cloud fabrics. These were the kind of wool that still had memories of the sheep attached. You learn quickly that your base layer is also your worst enemy. It doesn't breathe, it doesn't forgive, and it moves. Not gracefully, but like a slow constrictor snake that tightens slightly every time you bend over. The seams bunch, the cuffs ride up. The waistband digs in like a personal vendetta, and when it gets damp from snow, sweat, or an accidental splash from the coal bucket, it turns into a soggy, clingy nightmare. You attempt to change it out for a cleaner set, one that's slightly less haunted, but find that cleaner simply means different shade of grey and haunted in a new, subtler way. Washing woolen underwear in winter is an ordeal. You either do it by hand and risk frostbite, or you send it to the laundry where it may return stiffer, more brittle, and somehow even itchier than before. You talk to another lodger, a thin man named Mr. Ferris, who has a rash so aggressive he's taken to stuffing dried lavender in his undershirt. He smells like a mothball with ambition, but he swears by it. Another boarder, Miss Eliza, claims to layer linen between her wool and skin, though that only works if you're upper middle and own enough undergarments to play textile Jenga. You consider your options. There's talcum powder if you can get some. Some people swear by cold starch rubs, brutal but effective. Then there's a bizarre home remedy involving goose fat and salt, which sounds more like a holiday recipe than a treatment, but desperate times, etc. And let's not ignore the elephant in the itchy room: lice, fleas, bedbugs. These were not uncommon in the colder months, when layers were worn day and night and rarely changed. You begin to eye your seams suspiciously, wondering if the itch is merely fabric-based, or something more sinister. The matron tells you with alarming cheer, "Oh, winter keeps the lice quiet. They hate the cold. It's the spring you want to fear." Comforting. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether Edwardian wool was genuinely this awful, or if surviving examples have simply aged poorly. Some argue that middle and upper class garments were actually quite soft, even luxurious, made from lamb's wool or imported blends. But if you were working class, or in your case honorary Edwardian tourist on a budget, you got what was available, and what was available could double as a Brillo pad. By midday, your back is covered in red marks. You scratch them through 2 layers of clothing, trying to be discreet, but everyone's in the same boat. The entire boarding house is twitching like a hive of overly polite raccoons. Even the landlady has taken to pacing in a vaguely itchy fashion, muttering something about moths and wartime wool stockpiles. You try to find relief. The fire helps, but only in a psychological sense. Heat, paradoxically, makes the itch worse. You remember hearing somewhere that a hot bath could ease the symptoms if you had access to one, which you don't. But there's a tin-foot basin and a kettle. That's enough for a half solution. You boil water, add it to the basin with cold to make it tolerable. Then, in the privacy of your freezing room, you peel off your woolen armour and soak your feet and ankles. It helps, slightly. Your skin stings, then sighs. You use a scrap of soap that smells like coal and sadness to wash what you can reach. You pat dry with the only towel that isn't also a curtain. Then brace yourself and shimmy back into your underthings. Fresh discomfort, slightly different configuration. It's now part of your daily winter routine. Wake, scratch, dress, scratch again, pretend you're fine, tempt not to die. Still, there's a camaraderie in it. In the parlour later that evening, you find yourself talking rash remedies with 2 factory girls, a baker's apprentice, and a man who insists on wearing silk underclothes, which he calls continental. No one believes him, but everyone listens, because the itch is universal. The cold may not be an equaliser, but the wool certainly is. You sip your tea, legs tucked under you awkwardly, trying not to let the waistband dig in too much. The fire glows, the room smells like sheep and toast and damp flannel. And for the first time you think maybe, just maybe, you're finally becoming Edwardian enough to stop complaining. You still itch, but now it's just part of the costume. It's another misty Edwardian morning. One of those sullen, bone-cold days where the fog hangs low and thick like the world forgot to get out of bed. You step outside wrapped in your usual cocoon of wool and good intentions, and immediately regret it. The air has weight today. Not just cold, but wet cold. The kind that soaks into your clothes, then your skin, then settles directly into your organs like it's paying rent. Visibility is minimal. Your own boots vanish after about 3 feet, and you have already tripped on one cobblestone and a confused cat. This is the kind of weather where the idea of commuting feels like a cruel joke. And yet the city trudges on. People don't stop just because the weather is a nightmare. They just wrap an extra scarf around their head and keep going, faces half hidden and eyebrows frosted over. Your destination this morning? A short ride across town, your mode of transport, an Edwardian carriage, horse-drawn, under-insulated, and one minor accident away from being a rolling coffin. The first challenge is flagging one down. You stand at the edge of the street, half shivering, half praying that a hansom cab appears through the fog. Eventually a shadow emerges, a hunched driver bundled in oilskin perched atop a black carriage that looks like it's survived both war and weather. He pulls up beside you with a grunt. "Where to then?" he asks through a wool muffler. You climb in before answering, because the standing still any longer might result in your soul freezing inside your boots. The interior of the carriage is, charitably, awful. The leather seats are slick and icy, the window has a crack across it that lets in a fine mist, and there is absolutely no heat. You huddle into the corner, your knees knocking together, every exhale clouding up the inside glass. The only thing separating you from the elements is the illusion of being indoors, and that illusion is very, very thin. As the carriage jolts forward, you immediately learn that Edwardian roads in winter are less roads and more obstacle courses of suffering. The cobbles are slick with frost, and each bump is a personal assault. The horse pulls valiantly, hooves clattering and skidding slightly, the wheels rattling like they're ready to fall off. It's so loud you can't even daydream. All you can do is try not to bite your tongue as the cab lurches around another frozen corner. Eventually you try the old trick of sitting on your hands to keep them warm. It works for about 40 seconds before the icy seat eats through your coat and begins to freeze your backside. You shift again, this time trying to use your coat as a buffer. The carriage driver yells at someone in the street, someone else yells back. You're beginning to understand why everyone in historical portraits looks mildly furious. Now here's your quirky fact for the day. Some Edwardian cabs actually had foot warmers, but they weren't always included unless requested. These were typically metal boxes filled with hot coals or bricks, shoved under the passengers' feet to radiate a little warmth, until they went cold or set something on fire. You do not have one of those. You have the cold satisfaction of knowing they exist somewhere else. Carriage travel in this era wasn't glamorous unless you were wealthy enough to afford your own enclosed brougham. Those stylish, private, well-padded carriages with plush seats and sometimes actual insulation. But for the average person, public cabs were rough, cold and often delayed. Horses got tired, wheels stuck, fog like today's made visibility miserable. Accidents were common, pedestrians often darted out of the haze like Victorian ghosts, and drivers swerved or didn't. Either way, everyone lost. Scholars still argue over how reliable Edwardian transport really was in winter. Some suggest urban centres like London were remarkably efficient with a mix of carriages, omnibuses and emerging motorcabs. Others point out that the system was entirely dependent on weather, horse health, and whether your driver had gotten enough gin that morning to brave the cold with enthusiasm. At one point your driver stops to check something. You peek out and see his hands are bare, red and cracked, fingers so stiff they barely close around the reins. He mutters a few choice words about the frost, spits impressively into a pile of snow, then climbs back up and slaps the reins. The horse lurches into motion again, steam puffing from its nostrils like a dragon that's just about had it. You pass shop fronts half lost in the fog, their windows frosted over from the inside. A butcher hacks at something unidentifiable on a block of ice. A fishmonger displays his wares on a cart that needs no refrigeration. A young woman slips on the pavement and regains her balance with the grace of someone who's done this before, probably yesterday. Eventually you arrive. You fumble through your gloves for coins, hands too stiff to bend properly. The driver doesn't bother making small talk. He just nods once and trundles off into the mist like a mythical beast returning to its lair. You step out, boots crunching on salted stone, and immediately try to remember if your toes still exist. Your destination is only marginally warmer. You step into a shop, dry goods, smells like flour and boiled cabbage, and the clerk looks up, unimpressed. "Bit chilly out," he says, in the same tone one might use to comment on a slightly overcooked potato. You nod. You are not yet emotionally stable enough to speak. But here's the weird thing. As you peel off your scarf and flex your fingers back to life, you feel something that might be pride. You took the journey. You braved the carriage. You didn't fall out the door or freeze to the leather seat or get hit by a rogue fog-bound delivery cart. In the grand scheme of Edwardian winters, this was nothing. Tomorrow could bring sleet or snow or a full-on blizzard that shuts down every carriage and leaves you on foot. But for today, you've conquered the commute. And in this era, that counts for something. Just next time, maybe bring a hot potato in your coat. Or better yet, invent heated seats. You'd make a fortune. You've started walking everywhere now. It's not that you enjoy it. No one in their right mind enjoys trudging through Edwardian winter streets. But it's become the lesser evil. You'd rather face the elements than the emotional trauma of another frostbitten carriage ride. So here you are, boots laced tight, scarf wrapped around your head in a way that borders on medieval, ready to brave the city on foot. And almost immediately you regret everything. The snow has melted just enough to create a new kind of horror. Frozen mud. Not the kind you can stomp through with a grimace and a curse, but the kind that sucks your foot in like a trap and freezes it there, mid-stride, while you struggle to yank it free without losing your boot, or your dignity, and you won't always succeed. At least 2 people ahead of you today have already sacrificed their footwear to the street's bottomless goo limping away in stockinged feet like Victorian ghosts. Edwardian sidewalks, if they exist at all in your part of town, are narrow, uneven, and littered with patches of suspicious ice that don't look slippery until you're airborne. You develop a shuffle walk, half glide, half caution, trying to avoid anything that shines too much. Ice here is sneaky. It doesn't crack dramatically underfoot. It waits until you're distracted, then bam, sends you sprawling like a sack of turnips. Your boots are made of thick leather, and they're doing their best, but they were never meant for this. The soles are flat and stiff, no grip to speak of. Some clever people tie bits of cloth or old rope around their feet for traction, creating a kind of proto-snow boot, but you haven't reached that level of desperation yet. You pass a grocer brushing snow off his awning, with a broom that's mostly bristles and attitude. He gives you a nod, the kind that says, yes, we're all suffering, but at least we're upright. A group of children run past, shrieking, their boots sloshing and their coats flapping like tiny ships caught in a storm. They're covered in mud and joy, which seems both magical and medically inadvisable. Your destination is uphill, naturally. The road slopes gently but cruelly, curving toward the cathedral, and the path is more ice than anything else. Someone ahead of you slips and lands square on their back with a thud that echoes through the air like a dropped ham. You wince. They don't get up for a few seconds. When they do, they laugh, sort of. More like a wheeze. A crowd forms briefly, murmurs something sympathetic, and then moves on. In this weather, you don't linger unless you want to become part of the pavement. Let's take a moment to appreciate the absolute chaos of Edwardian footwear. For most people, boots were the default. Tall, stiff, and laced up to the calf, made to endure mud, horse manure, and moral judgment. For women especially, winter boots had to balance practicality with fashion, meaning they often had absurdly high heels and decorative buttons in all the wrong places. Imagine tiptoeing across black ice in something designed more for parlours than pavements. That's bravery. And then there were gaiters. Oh yes, cloth or leather coverings that went over your lower legs and shoes, buttoned or strapped into place to keep snow out and warmth in. They were fussy, awkward, and somehow always a little crooked. But without them, you were ankle-deep in slush, and frostbite was just a few puddles away. You finally reached the top of the hill, panting, like someone who's just completed a minor military campaign. Your boots are soaked. Your toes are buzzing with that just before they go numb sensation. You can't feel your thighs. You're about 40% sure one of your socks is twisted, but removing your boot to fix it would mean spending the rest of the day hopping on one foot while people judge you from behind their frozen monocles. And this is all normal. People do this daily. Kids walk miles to school in this mess. Bakers deliver fresh bread up hills of black ice. Street sweepers hack at curbs with iron tools, trying to scrape away enough ice to reveal something vaguely solid. Everyone has fallen. Everyone has cried. Everyone has moved on. Here's a strange little tidbit. In some cities, the worst winter intersections had sand boys, young workers whose job was to toss sand or ash over icy spots to improve traction. They were often paid in pennies and had to carry sacks of grit on their backs all day. In especially snowy winters, this was considered a full-time job. No benefits, no mittens. Historians still debate how much responsibility fell on individual citizens versus the local council when it came to street safety. Some argue it was expected that shopkeepers clear the sidewalk in front of their businesses. Others suggest that in poorer districts the ice just stayed, weeks at a time, becoming part of the scenery until a thaw finally arrived, or someone sued the city after breaking a hip, assuming they had the money to sue, or a hip worth saving. Eventually you find a bench that isn't buried in snow, brush it off with your sleeve, and collapse onto it like a marionette whose strings have snapped. You peel your gloves off slowly and wiggle your fingers. They're red, raw and buzzing. Your boots squelch when you shift your weight. It's like sitting in a puddle of your own questionable life choices. But you made it. You survived the frozen mud, the traitor cobblestones, the gentle hill that tried to kill you. And now you get to sit here and enjoy the city at its most miserable. Fog curling over chimney stacks, children throwing snowballs at street lamps, and horses snorting clouds into the winter air like disapproving dragons. You take a moment. You breathe in the coal smoke, the cold, the faint scent of roasting chestnuts from a cart down the street. And for one absurd, fleeting second, it's peaceful. Cold, but a peaceful. Just don't forget to retie your gaiters before you head home. They're starting to flap again. Somewhere between your third cup of tea and your second blistered toe, you decide to visit the local market. It's a weekday morning, technically too early for shopping, but the Edwardian winter doesn't respect your sleep schedule. Neither does the matron, who's already banging pans in the kitchen and muttering about ungrateful boarders and unboiled cabbage. You take this as a sign from the universe to get out. You pull on your layers, yes, all of them, tighten your boots, and step into the outdoors with the slow-motion dread of someone preparing to be disappointed. The air is thick with a cold fog that clings to your eyelashes and makes the tip of your nose feel like it might fall off. Again, you squint through the mist and start walking, hands jammed in your coat pockets, scarf wrapped around your entire lower face. You look less like a shopper and more like someone attempting to rob a train in slow motion. The market is already bustling when you arrive. Not bustling in the jolly, cheerful way you might hope, but in the survivalist, get what you can before it freezes or someone else grabs it kind of way. Stalls line the cobbled square in two uneven rows, most of them draped in burlap or tarpaulins sagging under the weight of frost. Some vendors have lit little fires in metal drums behind their carts. The smell is something, a mix of burning coal, singed canvas, fish and desperation. You wander in, your boots crunching over packed snow and patches of ice that glint just enough to mock you. A man selling root vegetables is shouting over the cold air, holding up a turnip with the enthusiasm of a game show host. Still fresh, still firm, he yells. It's got a bit of frostbite on one side, but so do you at this point, so who are you to judge? You drift toward the fishmonger's stall, possibly because you're hoping it'll be empty, possibly because the smell is so overpowering you suspect it might melt the frost off your face. To your surprise, it's busy. Several customers are already arguing over frozen haddock. The fish are displayed on slabs of ice, though honestly, it's not needed. Everything here is already cold enough to embalm a small mammal. You pick up a filly, it's stiff as a plank. You knock it against the counter. The fishmonger glares. You put it back. It's strange standing in a place meant to be alive with colour and sound, and instead watching everything move slowly, cautiously, like the cold has turned the whole market into a sleepwalker's dream. Even the animals look miserable. A shaggy dog tied near a meat stall is curled up on a potato sack trying to inhale its own tail for warmth. A pigeon lands briefly on a bread cart, reconsiders its life choices, and flutters off with visible irrelation. Then you reach the ice cart. Yes, ice, in the middle of winter, because Edwardians were nothing if not committed to doing things the hard way. The man running the stall is surrounded by blocks of ice wrapped in straw, stacked in crates glistening like crystals in the pale daylight. He's got an enormous saw and the general demeanour of someone who's spent way too much time talking to blocks of frozen water. You ask, politely through chattering teeth, who exactly is buying ice right now? He explains with pride that hotels, restaurants and wealthy homes still use it daily, for preserving meat, for chilling wine, for keeping milk from curdling, and occasionally for the novelty of displaying something on ice. He chips off a piece and hands it to you like it's a souvenir. You take it, nod, then tuck it into your mitten, where it immediately becomes a mistake. Fun fact, even during the coldest months, ice was harvested and stored in underground ice houses or thick-walled cellars packed with sawdust and straw to last through spring. The commercial ice trade was booming, yes, even in England, because indoor refrigeration was still rare, expensive and often unreliable. If you wanted something cold, you bought it colder. You move on to the baked goods stall. A woman in 3 shawls and what might be a tablecloth wrapped around her head is selling rock-hard scones and loaves of bread that could double as construction material. You buy one anyway. It's warm. Not soft, but warm. That's enough. You chew it carefully, like testing the integrity of an antique. Each bite sends small tremors through your skull. But again, warm. The meat vendor next to her has hung joints of beef and sausages along a rack that's slowly icing over. You reach for a small cut and your fingers stick to the edge. The vendor says, "Careful, love, that one bites." You're not sure if he means the meat or the frost. You buy a small paper-wrapped portion anyway, mostly to feel like you've done something productive. And this whole freezing ordeal, is what passes for grocery shopping in an Edwardian winter. There's a scholarly back and forth about whether open-air markets truly serve the working class well during winter, or just deepen their misery. Some argue they were essential, affordable, accessible and community-centred. Others suggest that in the colder months they became exercises in endurance, with many vendors closing early or skipping entire days due to weather. The reality, somewhere in the middle. Much like everything else in this era, it worked, just barely. With your purchases stuffed into a cloth sack slung over your shoulder, you head back through the market square, passing a chimney sweep advertising his services with a chalkboard that reads, "Clear your flue or shiver through." You appreciate the rhyme. The children clustered near his feet do not. They're mostly there for the embers from his brazier, hands outstretched, eyes wide and glassy. As you trudge home, sack heavier, fingers colder, you reflect on the quiet absurdity of the whole process. Buying frozen food while trying not to freeze yourself, bargaining for turnips like they're diamonds, carrying a loaf of bread like it's fragile glassware because if you drop it, it will shatter. And somehow, people have been doing this for generations. Back at the boarding house, you stomp the snow off your boots, peel off your gloves and present your loot to the matron. She takes the fish, nods at the bread, and raises an eyebrow at the ice chip you forgot was in your mitten. "Planning to cool your tea?" she says dryly. You smile. You have no idea anymore, but at least you survived the market, and in this weather, that's practically heroic. You're halfway through your tea, lukewarm, borderline tragic, when a thud at the window startles the entire parlour. At first, it sounds like a coal delivery gone rogue, but then comes the unmistakable plap of something wet hitting glass again, followed by a muffled whoop of laughter from outside. You get up and peek through the frost-covered pane just in time to see a snowball explode against the coat of a man dragging a barrow of cabbages. He doesn't retaliate, just shakes his head with the weary expression of someone who's accepted winter's nonsense, and is too tired to argue with it. Welcome to the unexpected battlefield of the Edwardian snowball fight. You thought you left these behind in childhood, but no. This is a town-wide sport. It doesn't matter how old you are, what class you belong to, or how many layers of itchy wool you've got wrapped around your body. If you're outside and there's snow, you're a target. You head out with cautious optimism. The cold bites at your ears as usual, but the street feels different today. Livelier. Less like a Victorian painting of quiet misery and more like a poorly supervised school trip. Children dart between adults, their gloved hands packing snow into tight aerodynamic clumps. Some have graduated to slush balls. Those are for the truly unhinged. Even the chimney sweep's apprentice takes a break from lugging soot to join in, pelting a stable boy who retaliates with the precision of a trained soldier. And it's not just kids. 2 grown men in waistcoats and work boots are exchanging lobs over a rail fence, grinning like they've just remembered how to be alive. A young woman in a bonnet lets one fly at her brother, who gasps with mock betrayal. The snow is everywhere, and for once it feels like part of the fun, not just the misery. You take a few steps into the street and immediately someone hits you in the shoulder. You freeze. The boy responsible looks unsure whether to bolt or bow. He's maybe 10 years old, red-cheeked, nose running, hands already forming the next missile. "You're it then?" he asks, eyebrows raised. You bend down, scoop a handful of snow and form your answer. Now you should know that Edwardian snowballs are not the soft, fluffy variety you see in modern movies. These are dense, damp, potentially weaponized. There's even a regional method in London where the snowball is rolled with both hands, then packed against a brick wall for firmness. Some take it further, sticking in pebbles, mud, even the bits of coal. Illegal? Probably. Effective? Extremely. The snow hits him square in the side. He lets out a delighted scream and bolts, already laughing. And that's it. You're in. No longer a quiet observer, but an active participant in what historians might call spontaneous community-driven thermodynamic conflict. You call it not freezing for 5 minutes. For the to do the next half hour, you dodge and dive, ambush and retreat. You throw poorly at first. Your arms are heavy, your boots keep slipping, but soon you find your rhythm. There's a moment where you hide behind a wagon, breath, puffing in great clouds, and you realise your cheeks are warm. Not metaphorically, actually warm. From fun. The cold doesn't feel as sharp now. Your body is moving. Your blood is awake. Of course it's all fun and games until someone throws a slush ball. It lands squarely on your back, soaking through your coat straight down the neck. You let out a noise that doesn't quite qualify as human. The boy responsible gives you a thumbs up before disappearing into a blur of snow and screams. You can't even be mad. It was a good shot. Let's pause here for your historical tidbit. Snowball fights in the Edwardian period were a surprisingly cross-class phenomenon. Rich or poor, child or adult, everyone participated, though predictably, the wealthier citizens tended to do so from the safety of manicured gardens, wearing specially imported snow boots. In contrast, the working class waged snow warfare in muddy alleys and cobbled streets, where the snow was already half ash and broken dreams. The ammunition quality varied wildly, but here's the real twist. Snowball fights could actually spark real fights. There are police records from the 1900s detailing street brawls that began with a casual snowball and ended with multiple arrests. One London incident involved a constable being struck mid-patrol and responding with what was later described in court as an excessive display of truncheon enthusiasm. The court ruled it unfortunate but understandable. Public opinion? Strongly in favour of the snowball. You eventually tire out, soaked, breathless, hair full of ice crystals, and collapse onto a bench that's half cleared of snow. A girl runs past and throws a half-hearted ball at your boots, but you wave her off with a grin. She laughs and disappears down the lane, her boots leaving perfect prints in the white. As you sit there, watching the street slowly return to its usual winter shuffle, something odd happens. A pair of young men, clearly middle-class types judging by their gloves and posture, stop to help an older woman across an icy patch. Just like that. No fuss, no one takes a bow, and you realise that something about the chaos of the snow brings people together, if only temporarily. For once, the cold isn't the enemy, it's the excuse, an invitation to interact, to play, to be ridiculous. And yes, maybe to peg a stranger in the back with a snowball packed slightly too firm. But all in good fun, you limp home, soaked but smiling. The matron frowns at your state but says nothing, just hands you a towel and points at the hearth. You peel off your wet coat, boots, and 2 of your 3 scarves, then collapse beside the fire like a weary soldier returning from war. Your hair is damp, your gloves are ruined, your back is cold, but your heart, surprisingly full. And hey, at least it wasn't a brick. You've just about dried out from yesterday's impromptu street war, your coat still smells faintly of slush and street food, when you're invited to something entirely new in the ever-deepening catalogue of Edwardian winter survival tactics. A countryside hunt. Yes. A proper old-school, frost-bitten, tweed-heavy, deeply muddy hunting party. The kind where men wear trousers that make no sense, and women pretend they're not freezing while balancing on frozen turf in heeled boots. It's less about sport and more about performance, really. But you've come this far. Why not spend the day tiptoeing through a frozen field in pursuit of birds that absolutely don't want to be found? The invitation comes via a woman named Agnes, a boarding house acquaintance who owns a countryside cousin and a warm pair of gloves, both rarities. She insists it will be bracing, which you've now learned is Edwardian for miserable, but we'll lie about it afterward. You travel early, catching the dawn train out of town. The carriage is cold, obviously, the windows are fogged, and you share your bench with a gentleman whose overcoat smells aggressively of pipe smoke and something that might be marmalade. The countryside unrolls outside in a blur of frost-laced hedgerows, skeletal trees, and fields so white they shimmer. It would be beautiful if your toes weren't slowly calcifying inside your boots. You arrive at the estate, though estate might be generous. It's a stone manor house, grand but tired-looking, with smoke trickling from several chimneys and a clump of unenthusiastic dogs barking somewhere off to the left. The welcome is polite. There's mulled wine, already lukewarm, and a tray of mince pies so dry they double as emergency coasters. The host, a man named Frederick, who seems perpetually startled by his own moustache, waves a gloved hand toward the fields and declares, "A fine day for sport." It is not. The sky is iron. The ground is iron. Your bones are iron, and they're unhappy about it. You are kitted out in borrowed gear. Wool trousers, a long coat, a flat cap, gloves you're warned not to lose, and a scarf wrapped with enough enthusiasm to qualify as amateur mummy cosplay. Most of the group is similarly wrapped, though with far more tweed. The level of pattern coordination is almost alarming. You spot at least one pair of tartan breeches so bold they may be illegal in several counties, and then you're off, marching into the fields behind a line of gun dogs who look like they'd all rather be curled up by the fire with someone's sherry. The cold air slices through your layers within minutes. The grass crunches beneath your boots, brittle with ice. Birds scatter ahead of you, and every time one takes flight, the entire group tenses like it's 1812 and someone just dropped a cannonball. A shot rings out. You flinch. The first pheasant drops. There's polite applause. Someone makes a joke about dinner being sorted. You smile, but your cheeks are stiff. Smiling in this cold feels like a facial workout. You start walking as Silpain, boots sinking into the partially frozen mud. Each step is an exercise in ankle strength and blind optimism. You're handed a shotgun at one point, which you hold with the terrified reverence of someone who's never trusted anything made of steel and wood while wearing mittens. You don't shoot. You pretend to aim once, miss a flying leaf and hand the weapon back with a shaky grin. No one seems to mind. Half the people here aren't here to hunt. They're here to appear to be hunting. It's a performance, a frosty dance of status and boots. Let's pause here for a historical detour. Edwardian hunting was, for the upper and middle classes, an important social ritual. It wasn't just about birds, it was about tradition, appearance, and demonstrating the very Edwardian value of enduring discomfort with elegance. Hunting parties were often used as casual matchmaking opportunities or subtle class negotiation events, because nothing says we should discuss land leases like trudging through sleet with a rifle. However, not everyone was thrilled about the whole affair. Animal rights activists were already making noise during the Edwardian era. A few outspoken reformers published pamphlets denouncing the cruelty of shooting birds for sport, especially when half of them weren't even eaten. But these voices were usually drowned out by aristocratic laughter and the crack of gunfire over moors they didn't own. Back in the field, things are escalating. One of the dogs has disappeared into a ditch. A man named Lionel is arguing about the trajectory of a woodcock. Agnes, bless her, is trying to keep her boots from sinking completely into the mire while holding a half-frozen sandwich. You're starting to lose sensation in your left foot. You consider lying down in the snow and letting the winter claim you. At least it'd be quiet. But then, out of nowhere, there's a break in the clouds. For maybe 10 minutes, actual sunlight spills over the landscape. It's weak and pale, sure, but it's light. And for that brief moment, the field doesn't look like a punishment. It looks like a painting, glistening frost on branches, distant hills glowing faintly gold, your breath curling upward like smoke from an old novel. You don't shoot anything you don't want to, but you walk with the others. Hands in your pockets, face lifted towards the sky like a plant that forgot what the sun feels like. Eventually the hunt ends, not with fanfare but with mild relief. Everyone shuffles back to the manor house where a weak fire and hot punch await. The dogs are towelled off, coats are peeled off with audible groans. Agnes collapses beside the hearth with the grace of a downed pheasant and declares the day an invigorating success, which you suspect is code for "I'd rather be in the bath." You sit beside her, boots steaming slightly, trying to flex your feet back to life. Someone's telling a story about a time when a fox jumped straight into their carriage. You half listen, half doze, fully exhausted. Hunting in Edwardian winter, you realise, isn't about killing anything. It's about proving you can walk through a frozen swamp in too much tweed and not complain, or at least not complain louder than anyone else. You didn't bag a bird, you didn't fire a shot, but you survived without falling over or crying into your mittens. And that, in Edwardian terms, is probably a win. The thing about Edwardian winters is that once they've settled in, they don't just chill your fingers, they start messing with your internal systems. At first, you think it's just fatigue. A few sniffles here, a bit of a sore throat. Maybe it's the result of walking home with a slush ball melting down your spine or standing too close to a fire with damp boots. You figure it'll pass. Just a common cold, right? Then you wake up the next morning and your throat feels like it's been scrubbed with gravel. Your sinuses are a sealed vault. Your chest is tight and your head is throbbing like it's storing weather forecasts. You are, in short, very ill. And in Nanto 6, that is a problem. You lie still for a while, swaddled in itchy blankets, hoping this is just your body's way of politely asking for more sleep. But then the coughing starts. Deep, rattling, productive, in the worst way, and loud enough to make the wall tremble. You sit up slowly and every muscle protests. You are suddenly painfully aware that you have no idea what the Edwardians do when they're sick. The matron hears the hacking and appears in the doorway within minutes, already holding a chipped teacup of something that smells like despair and cloves. "Cough tonic," she says simply. You eye it warily. It's either this or mustard poultice. You drink, it burns, your ears ring, your eyes water. It might be whiskey or turpentine, or something she made with whatever she found under the sink. You're not sure whether to thank her or write your will. Illness in the Edwardian era is not just unpleasant. It's existentially threatening. Winter brought a whole host of delights. Influenza, bronchitis, pneumonia, pleurisy, diphtheria, scarlet fever. Even a simple cold could spiral into something darker if left untreated, which, unfortunately, was the norm. You groan your way out of bed and shuffle to the mirror. Your nose is red, your eyes are sunken, you look like a villain in a penny dreadful. You try to blow your nose with a handkerchief the size of a small bedsheet, but the fabric is stiff and smells faintly of starch and mothballs. Downstairs the mood is grim. 3 other boarders are also coughing. One is wrapped in a shawl and sipping hot vinegar. Another is slumped in a chair next to the fire, clutching a lump of heated brick like it owes her money. The room smells like menthol onions and defeat. You're offered several cures. One woman recommends tying a strip of bacon to your chest overnight. Another swears by drinking hot gin with black pepper before bed. Someone else offers a tonic made with honey, garlic, and, alarmingly, kerosene. You make a polite face and keep sipping the Clove Ghost tea. Let's pause for the historical tidbit. The Edwardian era was a golden age for patent medicine. Bottled tonics, powders, lozenges, and elixirs were widely sold and rarely regulated. These miracle cures promised to treat anything from chilblains to internal melancholy. Most of them were useless. Many were laced with alcohol, opium, or cocaine. Some were just sugar water with a fancy label. You could pick them up at apothecaries, market stalls, or from travelling salesmen with impressive moustaches and even more impressive lies. One particularly famous remedy, Dr. Bateman's pectoral drops, was little more than alcohol and camphor. It did stop your cough, mostly by knocking you out or giving your body something worse to focus on. Another favourite? Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, used for colicky babies. It worked wonders, mainly because it contained morphine. The babies weren't soothed, they were unconscious. Scholars still debate how much damage these remedies caused versus how much psychological comfort they provided. Some argue they were dangerous distractions from actual treatment. Others point out that with limited access to trained physicians, especially in poorer areas, these tonics were the only help most people had. Even if the cure did come with a side of mild hallucination and liver damage. You lie back down on the couch in the parlour, coughing like a busted accordion. Someone places a hot water bottle under your blanket, and it helps. Briefly. Then it goes cold and turns into a damp brick, which is still somehow better than nothing. The doctor finally arrives later that afternoon. He's bundled in a coat so thick it could double as a tent, and his hands are stained with ink or iodine, or both. He smells like tobacco and old books. He listens to your chest with a brass stethoscope that's approximately the temperature of Neptune. Then he frowns, writes something in a notebook and says, "You'll live, provided you rest. And drink this." This is a bottle of syrup so dark it absorbs light. He gives you 2 spoonfuls and tells you to stay warm and avoid drafts. Then he's off to his next patient, probably someone with a severed toe or spontaneous Victorian hysteria. Either way, you're on your own. You crawl back upstairs to your room, dragging a hot brick and the syrup bottle like some Victorian goblin. You burrow into your blankets and hope for sleep, but sleep doesn't come easily. The cough returns in waves. The syrup helps, but it tastes like nightmares and regret. Somewhere in the early evening, the matron knocks and offers you a boiled onion. "For the chest," she says. You take it. You don't question it. You're too tired to fight superstition. You place it near your pillow and hope its mysterious onion magic activates before your lungs give up. You drift in and out of feverish half-sleep, dreaming of snow, coal, and a warm bed that isn't full of crumbs and soot. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, you wheeze, and yet somehow you're still here. By Edwardian standards, you're practically thriving. 3 days into your fever, the world has shrunk to the size of a chamber pot and the edge of your wool blanket. Time drips slowly between spoonfuls of black syrup and the occasional murmur from the hallway below. Your sense of smell has vanished, which, considering your current proximity to old flannel, damp walls, and boiled onion, might actually be a small blessing. You've stopped caring what day it is, you no longer resist the cough. It simply happens to you like weather. But today, something changes. You wake up not refreshed, certainly not cured, but lighter. Your head still buzzes like a broken lantern, but your limbs don't feel nailed to the bed anymore. You sit up slowly, wobble to the basin, and splash your face with cold water that smells faintly of tin and mildew. Congratulations, you have survived the mysterious illness of the week. Flu? Cold? Bronchitis light? You'll never know. There are no tests, just symptoms, sweat, and the unwavering support of something called poultices. Downstairs, the matron gives you a look that says, "I didn't think you'd make it," and hands you tea. She's kinder now in that brisk British way of pretending not to care, while very obviously having kept you alive for 72 hours with nothing but old wives' remedies and sheer willpower. "You'll need to rebuild your strength," she says, and places a heel of bread beside your mug. It's stale. It's perfect. But something's shifted. Not just in your health, but in your perception. You notice the thinness of the firewood pile, the way the tea caddy is being used sparingly, the quiet arguments happening behind closed doors about the price of coal. You've been in your room too long, you haven't seen what's been happening outside. That afternoon, still bundled in every blanket you own, you venture into town. The cold hits your face with the subtlety of a slap from a frozen trout. But you're moving, walking, alive, and what you see stops you in your tracks. A man in rags, coat shredded and patched with flour sacks, is crouched by a church wall, trying to coax heat from a candle stub. His face is grey in the worst way, not frostbite grey, but hunger grey. His fingers are bare, cracked, and trembling, and it's not just him. Along the alley walls and back lanes, huddled figures sit in silence, sharing scraps of cloth and dry crusts. You've seen the Edwardian poor before, at the soup kitchens, on street corners, but winter strips away the usual pretences. There is no hiding now. Hunger wears no disguise. Cold doesn't allow for pride. You walk past a workhouse gate. The stone walls are high and grim, with iron bars across the windows and a sense of finality about them. A man is being turned away at the door. Too full, they say. No more room tonight. He doesn't argue, just turns and walks into the fog, clutching his coat tighter. Here's where things get uncomfortable. Edwardian England had systems for poverty, but they were brutal. If you couldn't afford food or shelter, the workhouse was the last resort. Not a sanctuary, a warning. You gave up your freedoms. Your clothes, sometimes your family, in exchange for a bed and a meal. And in winter, even that wasn't guaranteed. You pass a woman selling matches from a tin cup. Her fingers are too numb to hold them properly. You buy a handful, not because you need them, but because she does. She nods without meeting your eyes. Her shawl is threadbare. Her boots are wrapped in newspaper. There's a wordless divide in Edwardian society, and winter makes it scream. The wealthy have hearths in every room, thick curtains, hot meals. The middle class grumbles about coal prices, but still has beds and blankets. The poor, they have corners, they have soup if they're lucky, they have lungs filled with soot and fingers that may or may not survive the week. You find yourself watching people's coats, their shoes. You notice who's walking quickly, because they're cold, and who's not walking at all. A boy sleeps sitting up against a post, hands tucked into his sleeves. A dog curls at his feet, not for companionship, but warmth. Fun fact, or rather sobering fact, during especially brutal winters, charitable missions would hand out greatcoats to the destitute. Thick, heavy wool coats meant to keep the cold out. They were few, often reused. Many were worn until the linings fell apart and the buttons gave out. But for the ones who got them, it was life-saving. A coat could mean the difference between a night on the street and a chance at morning. You wonder how many people didn't get one. Scholars debate the impact of these winter charities. Some argue they merely patched holes in a sinking system, delaying reform. Others say they were the only thing standing between hundreds of families and death. They weren't enough, but sometimes enough wasn't the goal, survival was. Back at the boarding house, you sit by the fire, still thinking about the boy and the matches, the man at the church wall. You tug your blanket tighter. Your room may be small and your fire fickle, but it's warm, comparatively. You have soup, bad tea, a mattress, and right now that feels extravagant. You ask the matron about the poorhouse nearby. She nods, pours another cup, and says quietly, "More come every day." You want to ask what happens when they can't fit more, but you already know. That night you wrap your coat around your boots and place your brick in the fire for warming. You double-check the windows for drafts. You do every ritual you've learned, but as you lie in bed, you don't feel the usual chill creeping in. You feel something colder, the realization that so many didn't make it this far into winter. You survived your illness. But survival here is never guaranteed. It's earned. One cough, one match, one coat at a time. The chimney is hissing again. That's the first sound you hear when you come downstairs, before footsteps, before clanking spoons, even before someone coughs into a scarf and calls it subtle. It's that thin, whispery sound of coal smoke curling its way up through soot-caked bricks, dancing around a world of narrow flues and crooked ducts. The fire crackles faintly in the grate, orange flickering behind the blackened iron, and the whole room smells like warmth, trying its best to fight death. You sit down in your usual seat, far enough from the fire to not roast, close enough to feel like you're still on speaking terms with your toes. There's a boy crouched near the hearth, arms wrapped around his knees, eyes fixed on the flames like he's trying to learn something from them. You recognize him. James, maybe? 11? 12? Small, too quiet, always carrying a smell of soot and scorched rope. He's a sweep. Or was, more likely. The industry's changing slowly, but in winter, when every hearth is hungry for heat and flues clog faster than you can say early death, work picks up, and desperate homes still send for someone nimble and brave, or just small and expendable. You clear your throat. Cold work, you say. He shrugs. Better than starving. Hard to argue with that. He pulls out a bundle of brushes, black with bristles like tortured hedgehogs, and sets them by the fire to dry. His jacket is too big. Sleeves frayed and his gloves have the fingertips missing, not for fashion, but because he's burned through them one by one. You watch as he leans toward the fire, stretching out his hands. His palms are red, his knuckles raw, and you start to understand that for kids like him, warmth doesn't come from a fireplace. It comes from inside one. Chimney sweeping in the Edwardian era wasn't just miserable, it was lethal. By the early 1900s, legislation had technically banned the use of children in flues, especially those too narrow for adults. But that didn't stop the practice. Families were poor, chimneys were tall, and boys, especially small ones, were cheap labour. There were inspections, yes, but mostly for show. If a child was injured or killed in a flue, it was written off as a tragedy, not a crime. Especially in winter, when people were more worried about freezing to death than following labour laws. James tells you, offhandedly, about the time he got stuck in a flue for almost an hour. Had to shout down into a pot of stew, he says, grinning faintly. Old man was cooking rabbit. Said I added smoke flavour. He laughs. You don't. Because now you're picturing a soot-blackened child wedged between bricks while someone waits for dinner. He describes the worst days, when the wind works against the flue, pushing smoke back down into the hearth, choking you while you scrape. The ash burns your eyes. The soot clogs your nose. You come out coughing, black from hair to beer to heel, and get paid just enough for stale bread and a bed of straw, maybe. Warm in there, though, he says, almost wistfully, when the fire's out, but the bricks are still hot. It's not so bad. You realise that's probably the kindest thing anyone said about the inside of a chimney. Here's your quirky fact of the day. In especially desperate households, sweeps used to collect falling birds from chimneys. Small ones, like sparrows or swifts, would sometimes nest in flues during the summer, and in winter they'd lose their grip, fall into the soot and, well, become lunch. Yes, it's gross. Yes, it happened. Waste not, want not. Scholars remain conflicted about the legacy of child sweeps. On one hand, they were symbolic of industrial cruelty, a dark chapter, often romanticised in art, but horrifying in reality. On the other hand, some kids saw it as opportunity. It was work. Dangerous, illegal, filthy, but it put coins in pockets and food in mouths, and in winter, that counted for more than laws written by people with indoor heating. You ask James how often he still climbs. He shrugs. Less now, bigger than I was. That's not saying much, he still looks like he'd blow over in a stiff breeze. Sometimes I help carry the rods, or push from below. He taps the side of his neck. Still gets in though. You cough black for days. You glance around. No one else is listening. They've heard it before, seen it, shrugged it off. Later that day you head into town and pass a soot-covered wagon parked outside a bakery. A man in a long coat and flat cap is hauling long rods and brush bundles. His face is streaked with grey. You see another boy, even smaller than James, sitting on the curb eating bread with dirty hands. The wind is sharp today. He's using the loaf to warm his fingers between bites. You keep walking, heart heavy, wondering how many chimneys you've sat beside this winter, how many warm fires you've enjoyed without thinking about who cleaned them. Not what, who. Every glow you've huddled beside was earned by someone who clawed their way through brick and smoke. That night, the fire in the parlour roars. Everyone is quiet. No one says much, but a few cast glances toward the hearth as if it might start speaking. James is gone, maybe working, maybe resting, maybe both. You sip your tea, staring into the flames, and think about warmth in layers. There's the heat of the fire, then the heat of work, then way underneath the slow burn of survival. And sometimes it comes coated in soot. It begins, as all great inconveniences do in Edwardian winter, with optimism. You're up early, too early, dressed and booted, scarf tucked around your neck with the kind of precision that says I've learned from frostbite. Your bag is packed with the essentials. Leftover bread wrapped in a handkerchief, a battered apple, and a tin of tea that probably smells better than it tastes. The train station is just 3 blocks away. Your plan is simple. Board the 817 to the next town over, browse a proper bookshop with actual windows, maybe write a smug little postcard to yourself. Cozy winter excursion, except the 817 doesn't come, neither does the 845, or the 910. And after you've been standing on the icy platform for nearly an hour surrounded by a chorus of polite but increasingly angry throat clearings, the station master makes his slow, reluctant announcement. Delays due to snow and sleet on the lines, limited service, possibly no service. Possibly. You blink into the cold grey nothingness stretching past the platform. It's sleeting. One of those hybrid winter tortures that starts as snow, changes its mind halfway down, and becomes icy rain with all the personality of a leaky ceiling. The tracks disappear into mist. There is no train. There is only the damp. You shuffle into the station house, a rectangular box of architectural regret, and join the small crowd of equally disappointed passengers. A man mutters something about needing to be in Luton by lunchtime. A woman sighs theatrically and removes her gloves one finger at a time like she's disarming a bomb. You find a bench. It's cold. Of course it is. Here's the thing about Edwardian trains in winter. When they worked, they were a marvel. Fast, efficient, and almost romantic. But when winter set in, chaos. The tracks iced over, the points jammed, the wheels locked up, and the boilers hissed in protest like angry dragons trapped in metal coffins. Conductors carried shovels alongside their punch cards. Firemen had to stoke not just the engine, but sometimes the actual station stove to keep it from freezing. And if the train did show up, well, then you had the pleasure of boarding a lightly refrigerated metal box with frosted windows and questionable upholstery. There were heating systems, technically. Small metal radiators beneath the seats that groaned faintly and gave off the warmth of a dying candle. Most passengers brought their own solutions, lap blankets, hand warmers, or just sheer resentment. You ask the station clerk when the next confirmed train will arrive. He looks at you like you've requested a unicorn. The 11:50's due, he says. If it can get through Wolverton. You have no idea what happens in Wolverton, but based on his tone it probably involves delays, disaster, or a cow frozen to the tracks. You sit back down, resigned. A small stove in the corner offers a square foot of heat that you share with 3 other people, a dog and a crying toddler who keeps licking the glass on the vending cabinet. You'd move, but the only other seat is directly under a drip from the ceiling. Outside, a man with a long moustache and short patience paces the platform. He pulls out his pocket watch every 2 minutes and frowns at it like it's personally responsible. A porter shrugs at him. Even the mail train didn't come, the porter says, like that should end the conversation. It doesn't. This is your quirky fact for the day. During particularly harsh Edwardian winters, the mail was often delivered by train, and when trains failed, the postal service turned to sleds, horseback, or simply didn't bother. Some towns went days without receiving a single letter. The gossip dried up. People had to speak to each other in person. Horrifying. Back in the station, the sleet picks up. You watch it streak down the windows in uneven lines, carving tiny rivulets through the frost. A boy sweeps the platform for the 3rd time pointlessly. Every time he clears a patch, the snow fills it in again within minutes. He doesn't stop. He just keeps going, muttering something under his breath that sounds vaguely threatening. There's a brief moment of excitement around 10:30 when the distant sound of a whistle cuts through the air. Everyone perks up, even the dog sits upright. But it's not your train, it's a freight engine, groaning past the station like it regrets being alive. It throws slush and disappointment in its wake. By now, your feet are cold enough to qualify as decorative. You peel off one boot to check. Your sock is damp, your toes are pale, and you seriously consider just wrapping yourself in a timetable and calling it a blanket. Someone passes around peppermint lozenges. You accept one. It does nothing but remind your throat how dry it is. Let's pause for a bit of context. Edwardian train schedules were often printed in thick booklets known as Bradshaw's Guides, painstakingly detailed and impressively useless during inclement weather. Delays weren't announced via speaker system, what speaker system, but by shouting, paper notices, or simply not showing up. You had to guess how late your train might be, Gus, like trying to interpret the moods of a particularly unpredictable relative. At exactly 11:49, there's a hiss, a rumble, and a miracle. A train pulls in. It's your train. It's real. It's short one carriage and smells vaguely of onions, but it exists. People rush the platform in slow, dignified panic. You squeeze on, find a seat near a window, and brace for motion. It comes, eventually. The train groans forward like it's dragging the entire season behind it. The interior is optimistic. Damp air, icy metal handrails, a pile of ashes in the corner from someone's failed hand warmer. The heating pipes beneath the seat radiate nothing. You huddle in your coat surrounded by passengers doing the same. There's a moment, though, somewhere near the edge of the city, when the sun briefly peeks through a crack in the clouds, lighting the frost-covered landscape in pale gold, and for a moment it's beautiful. Or you arrive in the next town 40 minutes late, which by Edwardian standards is practically early. You step off the train onto another ice-slick platform and immediately nearly fall. A conductor smirks, you tip your hat. The truce between passengers and railmen is always unspoken, especially in winter. Your day continues, bookshop, pastry, a warm corner by another tired fire. But it's the journey that stays with you. The waiting, the shivering, the community of near strangers and shared glances, the absurdity of it all. Edwardian winter doesn't want you to travel, but you do it anyway. There's something haunting about an Edwardian seaside town in winter. You wouldn't think to go, not unless you had a reason, some errand, a relative, a plan you made in late summer when you foolishly believed weather was a negotiable concept. But today you find yourself stepping off a sputtering local train onto a platform lined with salt-crusted iron posts and rusting timetables. The air smells like wet stone, brine, and boiled fish. The sea, somewhere beyond the fog, grumbles like it's in a bad mood. You're here, you suppose? Might as well see what's left. The station opens into a crooked little road, flanked by the shuttered shops with names that once screamed holiday excitement. Mrs. Winthrop's Taffy Emporium, the Seaview Tea Lounge, Mr. Cobb's Ice and Lemon Water Stand. All closed now, windows boarded or frosted, doors bolted, signs swinging on loose hinges. The kind of place where you can hear your own footsteps echo down the lane like a ghost following too closely behind. You walk toward the pier because that's what people do in seaside towns. Even now, in sleet and sideways wind, something about a pier calls you forward. The promenade is almost empty except for a few hardy locals and one man feeding stale bread to seagulls who seem half frozen, half furious. He gives you a nod that says, "Welcome to your bad decision." The wind coming off the sea is ferocious. It slaps your coat open, claws at your scarf, and seems genuinely annoyed that you're still standing. You hunch forward, gripping the rail of the pier as you walk, and finally reach the end. The view is non-existent. The sea is an undulating slab of grey. The horizon has gone missing. You close your eyes and just listen. Waves crashing against barnacled posts, the creak of rope somewhere behind you, and the wind, endless and impatient. You try to imagine this place in summer. Bright stalls selling shellfish, children dragging their parents toward the carousel, laughter skipping across the tide. You can almost see it. But the buildings are hollow now. The carousel is under a tarpaulin, chains clinking like it's mourning its own cheerfulness. Even the candy floss stand has collapsed under a tarp like a forgotten circus animal. This town isn't dead, just paused, and that, right there, is the core of an Edwardian seaside town in winter. The echo of joy. It's all still here, technically, but with the warmth drained out of it. like a painting that's lost its colour. You wander past a line of beach huts, little wooden boxes painted in faded pastels, doors locked, windows fogged. They tilt slightly in the wind like they've been waiting too long for someone to come back and hang a towel over the door. A seagull stands guard atop one, feathers ruffled, looking like it has war stories. Your boots crunch over frozen sand as you step onto the beach itself. There's snow here, thin, dirty, clinging to driftwood and half-buried shells. The tide is far out, the wet sand glistening with frost. You spot something glinting in the surf, walk closer, and discover it's just a broken bottle, polished smooth by years of waves. You pocket it anyway. It feels like the kind of thing you're supposed to do here. Let's pause for your historical tidbit. Edwardian seaside towns were the holiday destination for the upwardly mobile. Trains had made them accessible, guidebooks made them fashionable, and doctors made them sound like a medical requirement. Sea air was prescribed for everything from melancholy to digestive woes. Families flooded in during spring and summer, transforming sleepy fishing villages into bustling resorts. But in winter, the tide went out and took the tourists with it. Local economies shriveled, hotels sat empty, bands stopped playing. Waitstaff and shop boys either took seasonal work inland or huddled in boarding houses, hoping to stretch their summer wages through January. The towns themselves became eerie. Too many buildings, not enough people, just wind and salt and silence. There's debate among historians about whether these towns were truly thriving enterprises or just precarious seasonal bubbles. Some argue they were built on shaky foundations, dependent on sunshine and steam trains. Others see them as vital pieces of working-class leisure history, the first taste of luxury for many families. Both are probably true. But standing here in winter, it's hard not to feel the fragility. You pass a hotel with grand stone steps and a wrought iron sign swinging faintly above the door. The Grand Marine. It's open. Barely. The windows glow weakly behind heavy curtains, and a sign in the window says, "Rooms let, winter rates." You consider going in, just to warm up, just to pretend the town still breathes. Inside, the lobby is dim, heated by a single cast-iron radiator that clangs with effort. A woman behind the desk, hair in a tight bun, wearing more layers than you thought humanly possible, gives you a curt nod. You ask for tea. She disappears behind a velvet curtain and returns with a chipped pot and a cup that has Souvenir of Brighton etched on the side. You sit near the radiator, sipping the tea, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Somewhere deep in the hotel, a clock ticks. You wonder if this place ever truly fills up anymore, or if the people who stay here now are all like you, passing through, chasing something they can't quite name. When you leave, the air has thickened. Fog curls low over the rooftops. The town is being erased, minute by minute, until only outlines remain. You catch the evening train out, sharing the carriage with a man who smells like seawater and pipe smoke. He doesn't speak, neither do you. There's nothing to say, not really. You both stare out the window as the town recedes into the dark, street lamps glowing faintly like lighthouses. No one sails toward anymore. Back at the boarding house, someone asks how your day went. You shrug and say, "Quiet." And it was, but it was more than that. The seaside in winter isn't for holidays. It's for remembering that warmth is temporary. That joy, while real, often leaves behind only echoes and salt. And sometimes that's enough. It's still dark when the house begins to stir. Not a lively stir, more of a slow, resigned creaking of bodies that know exactly what sort of day they're about to face. Someone's already rattling the kitchen grate, coaxing the fire back into existence with a few chunks of damp coal and the hope of breakfast. You hear the clink of a kettle, the sound of stiff boots shuffling across wood floors, then the unmistakable scrape of a mop against the stone corridor. The servants are awake. You don't live in a grand Edwardian house, not exactly. The boarding house is modest, the sort of place where everyone pretends not to hear each other snore. But across the street is the real thing. 3 stories of frosted windows and morning misery. A house with parlours and parlour maids, with bells on the walls and a drawing room no one's allowed to sit in unless they're dying or distinguished. And this morning, the cook's assistant, a soft-spoken girl named Nora, who you've spoken to exactly once, invites you over. Not for a meal, of course. Not for warmth. To help. Why she asked you, you'll never know. Maybe she saw you stomping around the ice-crusted market last week, looking like a sympathetic pile of wool, and decided you could carry a coal scuttle. Maybe she just needed another pair of fingers that hadn't gone stiff yet. Either way, you find yourself knocking at the side entrance just before sunrise, scarf wrapped so high you could rob a bank, breath puffing little clouds in the frozen air. The door creaks open and she waves you inside. No good morning, just a nod. The air inside hits you like a wall of onions, grease and damp wool. Welcome to the underbelly of a well-to-do Edwardian household in the dead of winter. The kitchen is massive. Dark tile, low ceilings, wood and iron everywhere. The stove looks like it's powered by ambition alone, radiating enough heat to make your eyes sting. Pots hang overhead. Someone's already peeling potatoes. The scullery maid, barely more than a child, is scrubbing a pan with frozen fingers. Sleeves roll to the elbows and cheeks red from cold and embarrassment. Nora presses a folded apron into your hands. You can carry up the coal. You nod. Of course you can. Here's the thing about servants in an Edwardian winter. They weren't just cold, they worked cold. Before sunrise, after dark, every room had to be warmed before the master or mistress set foot in it, which meant hauling coal, lighting fires, sweeping ash and braving icy corridors in near silence. If your employer caught you visible, you'd likely get a lecture about efficiency or worse, decorum. If you were heard, you might be dismissed entirely. Warmth wasn't just a task, it was invisible labour. You lift the coal scuttle. It's heavy. You're already sweating. Nora hands you a rag to wipe your hands, except it's frozen stiff. You tuck it into your pocket and start your rounds. Each fireplace is a different nightmare. Some are easy, already smouldering, just needing a stir and a sprinkle of fuel. Others are cold, cruel, and filled with the ghost of a fire that didn't survive the night. One is still smouldering just enough to produce an entire room of smoke the moment you open the flue. You cough, eyes watering, and a footman peeks in just long enough to laugh and disappear again. Solidarity is not included in your temporary contract. By the time you reach the third floor, you can no longer feel your fingers. You dump the last of the coal into a ceramic bin by the nursery fireplace and glance around. Toys, wallpaper with faded ships, frost curling on the inside of the window. You're told later that the nanny sleeps here. Not the children, the nanny. The children are warm downstairs, the woman raising them sleeps beneath a cracked pane. You return to the kitchen and collapse on a stool, your shoulders aching and lungs full of soot. Nora pours you a cup of something hot. You're afraid to ask what it is, you drink it anyway. Here's a grim little fact. The average Edwardian servant worked a 16-hour day. 16 hours. In winter, that meant lighting fires, hauling water that had to be warmed manually, ironing clothes over stoves that barely functioned, sweeping icy floors in shoes with holes in them, and all of it in silence. No complaints, no rest, no recognition. And if you were female, as most of them were, you did it while being paid less than half what your male counterparts earned. Historians still argue about how bad it really was. Some suggest the job came with perks, room, a board, a stable routine. Others argue it was indentured servitude with better silverware. One thing's for sure, winter made it worse, made every step heavier, every task colder, every hour longer. You help Nora haul in a delivery, vegetables, a ham, and something that might be a swan if you squint and forgive the smell. She thanks you with a half smile and sends you out the door before the lady of the house comes down. "Can't have you seen," she mutters. You step outside into blinding cold daylight. The fog has lifted, and the air is sharper now, cleaner, but your coat smells like ash and boiled potatoes. You walk back to your boarding house with your back aching and your gloves tucked under your arms for warmth. Inside, the matron eyes your soot-streaked face and simply raises an eyebrow. "You've been useful," she says, not a question. She pours tea, doesn't smile. You take the cup and hold it in your thawing hands, letting the steam curl against your chapped cheeks. You never thought about what it took to keep this place warm. You never wondered who lit the fire before you got downstairs, or who boiled the water for your basin. You do now, and the next time you wake to a warm room and a glowing hearth, you'll know better than to take it for granted. Someone else lit that fire, probably before dawn. It begins, as all good coping mechanisms do, in the corner of a poorly lit pub. You've been cold for so long now that you're starting to name your individual chills. Your boots are drying by the fire in the boarding house, and you've wrapped your damp socks around the kettle in a move the matron described as deeply upsetting, but allowed anyway. And so barefoot, exhausted, and too itchy to care, you make your way down the block to the public house, drawn not by hunger, not even by thirst. but by the whispered promise of heat in a glass. The place is called the Copper Drake, though it hasn't seen a copper coin or a dragon in decades. It's tucked between a shuttered cobbler's shop and a tailor's with permanent sales signs in the window. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, heat, and the distinct smell of singed bread and wet wool. It's heaven. You order what's become the holy trinity of Edwardian liquid comfort: hot gin, mulled wine, and something the barkeep calls medicinal brandy. Though judging by the wink he gives you, it's probably just brandy in a teacup. The hot gin comes first, served in a short stained mug, steam curling out in curls like it's doing a slow dance. You sip. It hits immediately, not gently, not politely, no. Hot gin arrives like a back alley mugging with floral notes. It doesn't ask how your day's been, just melts its way down your throat, sets fire to your ribcage, and then casually warms your fingertips like it owns the place. You sit back, breathe, blink. For the first time in hours, your spine begins to unclench. Across the room, a man's snoring into his waistcoat. A woman's humming a tune no one else seems to know. The fire pops and hisses in the corner, burning logs that may or may not have once been part of someone's shed. No one asks questions. Then comes the mulled wine. Now, this is festive, spiced and warm, served in a thick glass that feels like a challenge to lift. It tastes like cinnamon got into a bar fight with cloves and dragged orange peels in as backup. It's sweet, too sweet maybe, but in the way that makes your cheeks flush and your toes twitch inside your damp socks. You sip slower now, letting it do its work. The bartender sets the brandy in front of you last. No ceremony, just a plain amber liquid in a porcelain teacup with a chip on the rim. You raise it with reverence. This is the serious stuff. No fluff, no spices, just fire and memory and maybe a little danger. And here's where we pause for your curious Edwardian fact. Alcohol wasn't just a social indulgence in winter. It was practical. The belief that spirits warmed the body ran deep, and while we now know it's more illusion than reality, it draws blood to the skin, making you feel warmer while lowering core temperature, Edwardians didn't care. They drank hot punch before bed, medicinal port in the mornings, champagne in the bath, if they had one. Gin was for the tough, brandy was for the sick, and warm ale was for literally everyone. Of course, the medicinal part was up for debate. Patent medicine, remember? Many cough syrups had more alcohol than the average pub drink. Some tonics were up to 40% proof. Babies were dosed with gripe water containing pure spirits. And don't even get started on the nightcaps recommended by doctors, a thimble of whiskey with warm milk, or a splash of rum stirred into tea and taken while standing near an open window for balance. Historians continue to bicker over how much of Edwardian alcohol use was health-related versus sheer escapism. The colder and more industrial life became, the more people turned to the bottle, not in the sense of collapse necessarily, but for a brief hour of quiet, chest-thawing relief. You didn't need to be a drunk, you just needed to be cold enough, tired enough, or lonely enough to want a little fire from the inside out. Back in the Copper Drake, the fires burn down a bit. The bartender pokes it lazily with a poker shaped like a swan's neck. Another patron buys a round for the room, cheap ale in tin mugs that clank when they're set down. There's laughter now, not loud but honest. Even the snoring man stirs. You sip your brandy again, slower this time, letting the heat seep all the way into your collarbones. Someone offers you a biscuit. It's stale but warm. You eat it like a feast, and for a moment you feel like you belong here. Not as a traveller, not as a voyeur to someone else's century, but as a fellow sufferer, quietly grateful for one room, one meat, and one glass of something that might burn the chill out of your bones for good. Outside, the sleet is still falling. The wind hasn't quit, but you're inside now, cloaked in liquor and low laughter, tucked between history and haze. Eventually, you'll head home. You'll stumble up the icy street, breath curling like cigarette smoke, and fumble with your key until the matron opens the door with a sigh that says again. You'll collapse into your scratchy bed, cheeks flushed, feet thawed, hands warm for once. And when you wake up, probably with a headache the size of a coal cart, you'll still be grateful, because for one evening in the middle of winter you were warm, and in Edwardian England, that's more than most people got. There's a certain point in the Edwardian winter, usually right about now, after the third consecutive week of grey skies and boots that never quite dry, when people begin to crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small, fraying ways that only someone truly intimate with the cold would notice. People laugh just a touch too hard at things that aren't funny. They stare at fireplaces long after the flames have gone out. They forget what warm bread feels like in the hands. You feel it too, that creeping numbness. Not the kind that settles in your fingertips, but the kind that settles behind your eyes. You've stopped checking the frost on the inside of your window because it's always there, like wallpaper you didn't ask for. Your coat has taken on a permanent smell, coal dust, boiled turnip, and something faintly metallic. You suspect it's just your own soul rusting, and so, like a character in a poorly written novel, you go looking for light. Not metaphorical light, actual tangible flickering light. Because today is gas lamp maintenance day, and someone has volunteered you, without your knowledge or consent, to assist the local lamplighter. Apparently you give off an able-bodied but disposable energy. The lamplighter is named Mr. Fairley. He appears promptly at dusk, carrying a long iron pole with a hook on one end and a brass lamp key on the other. He looks like a man who hasn't enjoyed anything since 1882. His coat is patched, his face is weather-beaten, and he smells like paraffin and permanent disappointment. "You'll carry the oil," he says. "Of course you will." You set off down the street, lugging a metal canister that sloshes ominously. The streets are slick with slush, and the sky is that dull and bruised shade of evening that makes everything feel like an old photograph. Gas lamps line the road, tall, narrow, and faintly gothic in their silhouettes. Some are already flickering, most are not. Mr. Fairley stops at the first one, unhooks the glass hatch with his pole, adjusts something with the key, and mutters, "Burn too fast, these ones. No pride in the work." You nod, because that seems safer than speaking. Here's your historical nugget. Gas lighting was the backbone of urban Edwardian nightlife. The lamps were fueled by coal gas, piped in from plants that turned coal into gas and soot into sky pollution. Every evening, armies of lamplighters fanned out across towns and cities to ignite the lights by hand one by one. It was laborious, cold, often dangerous work, but without them, total darkness. And in winter, darkness came early. Sometimes before tea, you walk with Mr. Fairley from lamp to lamp. He grumbles constantly. About the oil, about the soot, about children throwing snowballs at the glass, about lamps going out in high winds. You get the sense he lives for this misery. He treats each lamp like a stubborn mule that might bite if he turns his back. The job is surprisingly quiet. The streets are mostly empty, save for the occasional scurrying figure or bundled couple hurrying home. The gas lamps, when lit, cast a pale amber glow that makes the snow look almost golden in patches. The light flickers, alive, but just barely, like everything else this time of year. You stop at a lamp that refuses to catch. Mr. Fairley mutters, pokes it, mutters again. "Valve stuck," he says, then turns to you. "Up you go." You blink. "Up?" He points to the ladder lashed to his cart. Apparently you're the designated climber tonight. The metal rungs are cold. Your gloves are useless. You ascend slowly, awkwardly, trying not to drop the lamp key or your dignity. At the top, the wind bites harder, and you realise this whole exercise is less about lighting the streets and more about reminding you how exposed a person can feel at 6 feet above ground with a tin box full of flammable gas. Still, the valve turns, the hiss begins, you strike the ignition stick against the hatch and there, flame, wobbling, faint but steady. You climb down, victorious. Mr. Fairley nods once. That's high praise in his language. Let's pause for your quirky fact. Before gas lamps became widespread, many towns were lit with oil lamps, or not at all. But even with gas, the infrastructure was fragile. Some nights lamps simply wouldn't work. Others burned too brightly and caught fire, and during fog, which was basically every winter, the light barely reached the ground. People still carried lanterns, candles, or just tripped over everything in sight. Romance aside, Victorian and Edwardian nights were mostly dark, dangerous, and deeply inconvenient. There's a scholarly debate about the impact of gaslighting on public behaviour. Some argue it extended productivity and allowed for safer travel after dark. Others note it simply gave the illusion of safety. Crime still thrived in the shadows, and gas itself was a hazard. Leaks were common, explosions weren't rare, and the air pollution? Unthinkable by modern standards. Back on the ground, you begin to appreciate the subtle shift in atmosphere. As more lamps ignite, the street transforms. Not bright exactly, but visible. Shadows soften, corners glow, the snow sparkles faintly under the yellow light. It's still cold, still bleak, but less lonely now. Light doesn't make the winter go away, it just gives it somewhere to sit. You and Mr. Fairley finish your route in silence. By the time you return to the starting point, the street looks like something out of a postcard. Flickering lamps, crooked chimneys, the distant whistle of a kettle or train or some ghost that never caught up to modernity. He nods once. You did all right. You nod back. It's the closest thing to a compliment you've received all week. That night, you walk home through the lamplit street. Each glow feels earned. Each flicker, a reminder that even in the coldest months, someone climbs the ladder. Someone lights the way, even if it's only enough to see your next step, and somehow that feels like a win. You wake up to fog, not the poetic kind, not the soft, rolling mist of romantic postcards or breathy poems, but a real, tangible wall of grey that somehow managed to seep through the cracks of your window and settle on your carpet. It hangs low in the room like an unwelcome guest. Your lungs feel thick before you've even sat up. When you drag your sleeve across the window pane, it smears the condensation but reveals nothing, just more grey. It's not just a foggy day, it's London fog. The Edwardians had a name for this phenomenon, a pea souper. Not because it was comforting, because it was thick, yellowish, and unpleasantly reminiscent of overcooked peas. It wasn't natural mist, but a deadly cocktail of smoke, soot, sulphur, and water vapour. Coal fires in every home, gas lamps on every street, factories belching black breath into the sky. This was industrial weather. You didn't just see it, you wore it. By the time you're downstairs, even the parlour fire looks muted, smothered under the weight of the air. The matron says nothing, just hands you your tea and stares into the hearth like she's expecting it to solve all her problems. There's a general consensus among the boarders that no one is going anywhere today unless it's absolutely necessary. You, of course, have made the mistake of scheduling something important, or at least annoying enough that you can't bail, an appointment at the post office. The walk is only 5 blocks. You convince yourself it'll be fine. It is not fine. The moment you step outside, the air clings to you like damp wool. It smells like 1,000 coal fires exhaling into your face all at once. You cough instantly, then keep coughing as you shuffle down the street, one cautious boot at a time. Visibility is laughable. You can't see more than a few feet ahead. Shapes loom suddenly, like ghosts. A horse-drawn cart with its driver wrapped in 6 scarves. A woman with a shopping basket moving by memory alone. A chimney pot lying in the street like it gave up trying to stay on the roof. It's completely silent too. The fog smothers sound. You hear only the soft crunch of your boots and the occasional clang of a distant bell. You pass gas lamps glowing faintly. Yellow orbs suspended in murk. They don't help. If anything, they make it worse. Shadows appear where there shouldn't be any. Corners flicker with movement. You start imagining things, faces in the fog, figures that disappear when you turn. Let's pause for your historical fact of the night. Edwardian London's fog wasn't just unpleasant, it was deadly. People died from simply breathing it in. The elderly, the young, those with respiratory issues. It was like walking through a slow-motion gas attack. The fogs could last for days, even a week. One particularly infamous event in 1905 caused dozens of deaths and left the city paralysed. Horses collided, carriages overturned. People walked into the Thames and were never seen again. It wasn't just weather, it was a public health crisis. And yet they kept burning coal. Scholars still argue about why so little was done. Some say it was ignorance. The science wasn't there yet. Others point to class. It wasn't the rich suffocating in the slums. It was the poor, the workers, the sweepers and servants. What was a little choking smog to Parliament when their mansions had cleaner air and private physicians? You reach the post office coughing like a Victorian ghost. Inside, the clerk looks barely alive. His moustache has frosted at the edges from his own breath. You hand over your letter, he stamps it slowly, and neither of you says a word. The place smells like wet ink and despair. You nod politely, turn and plunge back into the void. The walk back feels longer. The fog is heavier now, a yellow-brown haze that dims even your own thoughts. You hold your scarf over your mouth. It helps. A little. You keep one hand outstretched, not for balance, but just in case you suddenly meet a lamppost or a door, or another confused pedestrian. It's a completely different city in this air. Familiar streets now feel endless and unfamiliar. The landmarks are gone. Your boarding house could be 1 block away or 50. You pause under a flickering street lamp to get your bearings. A man passes, tipping his hat. Though you only catch the outline, a woman appears from the fog, clutches your arm, whispers something unintelligible, and vanishes before you can answer. You stand there for a moment wondering if that actually happened, or if your lungs are just running low on clarity. Here's your quirky fact. During dense fogs, some Edwardians hired guides, usually young boys who knew the streets by heart, to walk them from home to work or back again. For a few pence, these fog boys would take your arm and lead you like a seeing-eyed dog through the thickest parts of town. It was considered a perfectly respectable transaction, and in the right weather, a downright necessity. Eventually, somehow you stumble back into your street. Your building's gas lamp glows faintly above the door, and you nearly cry at the sight of it. You fumble with your key, push open the door, and step inside like a shipwreck survivor crawling onto shore. The matron looks up. You went out in that. You nod, wheezing. Idiot, she says, and hands you a hot brick from the hearth. You crawl upstairs, strip off your soot streaked coat and lie down fully clothed on your bed, breath still wheezing, skin sticky with fog. Your lungs hurt, your eyes sting, your bones feel like they've been rolling in ash. You stare at the ceiling, wondering how anyone lived through weeks of this without losing their minds or their lives. Eventually your breathing settles. The taste of fog still lingers on your tongue, like coal and metal and regret. But you're inside now, and the fire downstairs is still going. Outside, the street has vanished. The world has folded itself into smoke, but you're here. You're still breathing. And in an Edwardian fog, that's more than enough. By this point in the season, your standards have adjusted. Clean socks, a luxury, soup that doesn't taste like wet paper, a triumph, a room without a mysterious drip from the ceiling, practically aristocratic. But above all, warmth, real, bone-deep, uninterrupted warmth, has become your white whale. You chase it in little ways, standing too close to the bakery's ovens, lingering in stairwells warmed by other people's fires, pretending to examine shop windows just to absorb the lantern heat. But today, you discover something new, something unexpected, something the Edwardians, in all their drafty wisdom, knew how to do better than we give them credit for. You discover the public bath. It begins with a suggestion from Mr. Emery, the retired schoolteacher who lives in the attic room and smells like old dictionaries and boiled turnips. You look half frozen, he tells you over a breakfast. Go to the municipal baths. If you scrub hard enough, you might remember what your skin looks like. You raise an eyebrow. It's not about getting clean, he adds, buttering toast with the ferocity of a man who's survived 4 winters too many. It's about thawing. And so, curiosity piqued and skin flaking off like week-old pastry, you make your way across town to the Lowry Street public baths. The building itself is unremarkable, a block of brick and steam tucked between a butcher and a pawn shop. But the moment you open the door, you're hit with something almost mythical: humidity, glorious lung-filling, eye-stinging moist air. For the first time in weeks, your lips don't immediately crack open when you smile. It feels like stepping into someone's exhale. A sweaty exhale, yes, but warm. You pay your penny and are led to a cubicle by a woman with arms like flour sacks and an expression that says she's already tired of you. The cubicle is tiny, tiled in white, and contains a metal tub that looks like it was salvaged from a shipwreck. A pipe gurgles in the corner and a small chain dangles from the ceiling, attached to a bell no one's explained. Cold on the left, hot on the right, the attendant says. Don't turn them both at once unless you fancy a geyser. She leaves. You stand there, awkward, holding a scratchy towel and a bar of soap that smells like regret. And then, slowly you turn the tap. At first there's nothing, just a low groan, like the plumbing is remembering how to exist. Then a sputter, a hiss, and finally steam. Glorious, scalding, eye-watering steam pours into the tub, and your heart genuinely skips a beat. You strip with all the grace of a molting bird, lower yourself into the water, and for one blissful moment, nothing else exists. No snow, no coal dust, no chilblains, just heat, encasing you like a second skin. You make a noise that might be illegal in 3 countries. Your limbs go slack. Your thoughts, foggy and fragile, begin to float. This is what resurrection must feel like. Here's your historical tidbit. By the early 1900s, public baths were a vital part of city life, especially for the working classes, who often lived in homes without running water or private facilities. Municipal baths offered cleanliness, dignity and warmth for the price of a loaf of bread. Some even had steam rooms, swimming pools or separate hours for men and women. In winter, they were less about hygiene and more about survival, a place to escape the cold for a few hours and remind your body that it wasn't just a meat popsicle. The soap provided was often harsh, made from leftover fat and lye. The towels were shared, badly laundered or barely absorbent, but no one cared. What mattered was the heat. The chance to scrub yourself raw, watch the grey water swirl away, and feel alive again, even just for the length of a single bath ticket. You soak until the water turns lukewarm, then cold, then unforgiving. You lurch out, shivering and dripping, but too happy to complain. The towel is awful, exactly as expected, but you dry off with the enthusiasm of someone shedding a former life. You dress slowly, skin pink and soft, and emerge from the cubicle feeling reborn. Outside, your breath still fogs the air. The sleet still spits sideways, but you are clean, and more importantly, you are warm from the inside out. You stop at the bakery on the way home and treat yourself to a hot roll. The baker looks at your flushed cheeks and slightly steaming collar and nods approvingly. "Baths?" he asks. You nod. He hands you a second roll, free of charge. There's something deeply communal about the public bath, not just the literal sharing of space and steam, but the shared understanding. Every person who walks out of that building walks a little taller. Their joints move a little easier. Their coats fit better. Their dignity, washed off and wrung out, is buttoned back up with care. Here's a quirky detail. Some Edwardian public baths offered second-class and first-class bathing rooms, the difference being things like towel quality, privacy and water pressure. The hot water was often rationed, and bathers were given a set number of minutes before the tap was cut off or their token expired. Some tried to sneak extra time, some begged, some bribed, most just learned to wash fast. You take your time walking back. The cold doesn't feel quite so personal now. You know it'll seep in again. The heat from your bath will eventually fade, your skin will dry out and your boots will be damp before dinner. But for now you feel smug, human, slightly spoiled. You arrive back at the boarding house glowing like a lantern. The matron peers over her knitting and squints. "You're too cheerful," she says. "You've been somewhere indecent." "Public bath," you reply proudly. She snorts. "Same thing." You head upstairs, where your room is still chilly, the fire is still lazy, and your blanket still smells faintly of coal. But you don't care, because under all that you're still warm. And in the Edwardian winter, warmth is the rarest luxury of all, earned with a penny, a towel, and a half-rusted tap. The days are starting to lengthen, just barely. A few extra minutes of grey light at the end of the afternoon. A subtle shift in the shadows. You notice it not because it's especially hopeful, but because the boarding house dinner bell now rings while it's still technically daytime. And that feels like something worth noticing. You're not quite at spring. You're not even close. But the end of winter is beginning to make itself known, the way a tooth stops aching for just a moment before it starts again. You don't trust it, but you'll take it. By now, you've learned how to survive the Edwardian cold. Not thrive, mind you, there's no thriving here, just endurance with a little flair. You've mastered the art of layering, perfected the coal fire lighting sequence, and even developed a sixth sense for which sections of the street carry the least wind. You can spot a draft at 20 paces and instinctively know the temperature of a basin before your hand gets within a foot of the water. These are skills no one brags about, but everyone silently respects. And today, you use all of them, because today is market day. It happens every Saturday, regardless of sleet, frost, or existential despair. The stalls arrive like a travelling army, canopies lashed together with rope and stubbornness, tables covered in burlap, scales and weights pulled from coat pockets like magic tricks. You don't go for the thrill of shopping, you go because in winter the market is one of the few places that feels alive. There's shouting, real human shouting, barkers calling out the price of potatoes, fishmongers haggling over herrings, children whining about penny sweets. The air is full of steam from roasted chestnuts and meat pies that look like crimes against nature but smell like redemption. You pass a woman selling wool socks knitted so tightly they could probably survive a cannon blast. A man offers hot eels, which you politely decline, twice. At one end of the market, someone is singing. Not well, but loudly, and a small group has gathered around a brazier filled with scrapwood, passing around tin mugs and stories. You linger nearby, pretending to study a box of onions just to be near the heat and the laughter. Someone offers you a half pint of ale. It's warm in all the wrong ways, but you'd drink it anyway. It helps. Here's your historical insight of the evening. Edwardian street markets didn't stop for winter. They adapted. Many traders sold seasonal goods, salted meats, pickled vegetables, preserved fruits in cloudy jars. Others leaned into winter-specific wares, coal by the sack, boot wax, hot bricks, or kindling bundles tied up with string. Some even sold second-hand clothing pulled straight from charity shops and auction houses, worn and faded but better than freezing. The market was chaotic, yes, but also practical. It was where you could find a dozen cabbages for a penny, hear the local gossip, and warm your hands on a vendor's stew pot when you pretended to be interested in ingredients you couldn't afford. It was loud, smelly, occasionally disgusting, and one of the most vital parts of winter survival. You buy a loaf of bread, mostly intact, and a wedge of cheese that's beginning to sweat slightly in the cold. You consider a jar of pickled eggs, decide your stomach doesn't deserve that kind of punishment, and instead treat yourself to a hot potato wrapped in newspaper. It burns your hands in the best way, and the newspaper ink sticks to your fingers. There's a strange joy in the market, grimy, sharp-edged joy, but real. People smile more here, even when their boots leak and their coats don't button. They joke with strangers. They complain in unison. They offer unsolicited opinions about produce. You've seen more genuine conversation in this market stall line than in a week's worth of polite parlour visits. Here's your quirky fact. Some Edwardian markets hired musicians to play during the winter months, not out of generosity, but because crowds stayed longer when there was entertainment, and that meant more sales. The music wasn't always good. Sometimes it was just a boy with a penny whistle and frozen fingers, but it added warmth in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. You pass a stall selling books, their covers warped with moisture, pages yellowed. You find one with a cracked spine and a title you vaguely recognise. You ask the vendor the price. He looks you up and down, then shrugs. Tuppence, or a story. You blink. A story? Something interesting, something odd. Doesn't have to be true. You smile, and for once that's easy. You tell him about the fog, the lamp, the bath, the time the matron chased a rat out of the pantry with a broken umbrella and declared war on the entire rodent population of Southwark. You tell him about the boy who climbed chimneys and the girl who sold onions by the road with more confidence than most generals. You don't embellish. You don't need to. He laughs, then hands you the book. Fair trade. You tuck it under your arm and wander back through the market, feeling slightly taller, slightly warmer. Not because of the brazier, or the ale, or the paper-wrapped potato, but because you remembered something vital. This season doesn't just punish. It connects. It draws people together in queues and kitchens and fog-choked streets. It forces you to see each other, to depend on one another, if only for warmth, a meal, or a borrowed story. As the light fades, the stalls begin to pack up. Tarps are rolled, coins are counted, the last of the pies are sold for half price to anyone fast enough to grab one. You head home, cheeks pink, arms full, feet aching in that specific been walking on cobbles for 3 hours sort of way. You let yourself in, stomp your boots clean, and are greeted by the unmistakable smell of lentils and sarcasm. Back from the trenches, the matron calls from the kitchen. You hold up the cheese and the book. Victory! She grunts approval. Later, in your room, with your feet near the fire, and your coat steaming faintly on the back of the chair, you open your new book. It's awful. You read 10 pages and learn nothing. Still, you keep reading. Because sometimes, surviving winter isn't about progress or insight, it's about motion, buying breaded, telling stories, from showing up again and again until the days get longer and your bones stop aching. You're not there yet, but you're close. Oh. And now, here you are. The coal has burned down to ash, your tea has gone cold in the cup, and the window pane glows faintly with the yellow cast of a distant lamp. You've lived the winter, step by shivering step, through sleet-stung streets and smoky parlours, through frost-bitten routines and soft, stubborn rituals. You've trudged markets for warmth disguised as bread, fought for a few moments of bathhouse heat, and learned to see through the fog, not just the literal kind, but the kind that creeps into your bones and convinces you that spring might never come, but you made it. Not in grand, glorious fashion, but in the quiet, undramatic way most Edwardians did. One cough, one boiled potato, one cup of heavily doctored gin at a time. There was no miracle, no great escape, no flick of fortune's wand, and just layers upon layers, and the shared knowledge that if you couldn't outsmart the cold, you could at least outlast it. And maybe that's the lesson after all. Not just how they survived the brutal winters, but why they did. Because someone had to stoke the fire before dawn, because someone needed the bread delivered, the lamp lit, the child carried across the ice. They endured not for comfort, but for each other. So as the last embers fade and the room dims around you, take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. You've walked their path, felt their chill, and seen how a little stubborn warmth inside a glove, a cup, or a shared glance can carry someone through the deepest cold. Sleep now, warm and unbothered. The hard part's over.